so much for being here and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
I'm even more excited. I'm so honored to have you here. I never told you this, but you've been towards the very top of my wish list of guests to have on this podcast ever since I started this podcast a few years ago. So I'm very excited that we're finally making this happen. I have so many questions for you. My first question is just, what the heck are you up to these days? I feel like ever since you left Slack, we haven't heard much from Stewart. I'm curious what you're up to. Hopefully you're just chilling.
I'm mostly just chilling. I left Salesforce 2.5 years ago, and I have a 2.5-year-old. So she was actually born 3 days after my last day. So a lot of time with family, and it's like an enormous privilege to be able to spend time with young kids while they're young. No new company to announce or anything like that. I do get a lot of emails and texts, basically every 3 to 6 weeks, there's this cycle because Cal Henderson, who's the CTO of Slack, and who also, we work together on Flickr, so have worked together now for 23 years, have been talking about what we want to do next, if there is something. But, honestly, the big challenge has been, I think these things are kind of destroying the world. And what we're good at is making software. So you can find some way to make software that helped people use their phones less often, then that would be a big winner, but haven't come up with anything good. A lot of philanthropic work, nothing to announce there yet, but there's some cool projects that I'm working on, and a lot of just personal creative art projects and supporting other artists and stuff like that.
To prep for this chat, I talked to so many people that have worked with you over the years to try to figure out what you taught them about building product, building teams, building companies that most stuck with them, that most helped them build amazing products. The first is a concept called utility curves. This came up a bunch across so many people that have worked with you. Talk about what is a utility curve, how you think use that to build better products.
This is pretty easy because it's a very familiar S-curve where, you have, it's flat and it starts arcing up, and then there's a really steep part and then it levels off again. And on the horizontal axis, you can think of cost or effort. And on the vertical axis, it's value or convenience. It kind of depends exactly what you're talking about. But the idea is the first bit of effort you put into something doesn't result in a huge amount of value. And then there's some magic threshold where it produces an enormous amount of value, and then continued investment doesn't really pay off. The most basic example I can think of is, let's say you're making a hammer, and on that bottom axis, it's now quality. And if the hammer has a handle that breaks with any impact, then it's totally useless. And if you make it a little bit stronger, it's still pretty useless. And it's kind of like junk, 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 junk. Okay, good, great. Then it doesn't matter anymore. If you're making an app, okay, this app's going to have users, and so let's make a users table in a database. And so far you have generated no value. The reason I felt like this was so important is because we would talk about a feature, and usually features are thought of as binary, you either have this feature or you don't. And so the argument, I guess, was, have we just not invested enough in this, or have we got all the value or convenience or quality or whatever that we could get out of this? And we've hit the point of diminishing returns, and it just doesn't matter. And I think in many cases, people will add a feature. It's not good enough. And so people don't use it or appreciate it. But now you've added some complexity to the app, and then people give up or take it back, or they try something in testing and they don't get the results they want. And so they decide that this thing isn't worth doing. And so we would try to really investigate and decide whether we were on the first shallow part of the curve, the second shallow part of the curve, or we're just coming up to it. So I think it's a lot easier to understand the value of this when you're talking about a specific app and a specific feature. But I think it was ultimately helpful in getting people to understand whether something was worth it or not.
Okay, so just to mirror back what I'm hearing, there's kind of this, if you visualize this curve at the bottom, it's I don't even know what this is. And then up the curve is okay, I sort of get it. And then at the top is, okay, I can't live without this now that I understand what this is for. It feels like it's it's a different way of thinking about getting to the aha moment for someone where they see, okay, saved items. I get it. I need to use this constantly. So it feels like this works both for a specific feature and also just for Slack, like getting people to even understand, here's what Slack can do for you. And then now I can't live without Slack. And essentially, this is a lens you use to figure out where to spend product resources, because if you don't get up that curve to, I get it and I can't live without it, nothing else matters. Is that the framework?
Yeah. And I think then you layer on another concept, like the Bezos used the term divine discontent. The line actually moves because once people are familiar with a piece of software or the way a feature is implemented or something like that, their standards go up. And so there's like this competition. And again, this axis can be, utility is the best general term for it, but it could be quality, convenience, speed. It could be any number of things. But as you improve your search capability, or as you improve your login experience or your forget password experience or your checkout experience or whatever, everyone else is as well. And so there's this continued investment. And when, forget about thinking about a new feature, you're looking at how the product works overall. And usually things get kind of implemented once. And then if they're lucky, they get improved upon periodically. Most things get improved upon very infrequently, and some things get improved upon never. And, so I'm going to give an example at the absolute extreme, because I don't know how long this has been, but I try not to criticize other people's software so much because I'm very familiar with the trade-offs and prioritization and how hard it can be and blah, 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 blah. But okay, so most people have the Gmail calendar app on their phone. I travel a fair bit. I'm mostly in the Eastern time zone, sometimes in Mountain time, sometimes in Pacific, sometimes in English time, and sometimes in Japan, Central Europe. There's like maybe 10 time zones, 12 time zones that I would ever choose. When you hit the option to set the time zone on an event in Google Calendar on the iOS app, it presents all the time zones in the world in alphabetical order. And that's like there's probably worse orderings, but there's no value in that. And even when you start searching, it still presents them in alphabetical order by country with that turn. So if I'm in California and I'm trying to set an appointment for next week when I'm back in New York, and I type in EAST, and I get a bunch of garbage. Okay, Eastern, ERN. And then the first one is Eastern Australia, New South Wales. And then Eastern Australia, Queensland. And then Eastern Australia, Daylight Savings, and Eastern Australia, Standard Time. And then you're like, well, fuck, what? I can't remember which one is Daylight Savings and which one is Standard Time. And what? I could keep going like this for a while. This is an app that's used by at least hundreds of millions of people, presumably every single Google employee. It's bananas how bad it is. There's so many, there's all these clever things you could do. Like, me, I'm on the West Coast. First option should be the East Coast and vice versa. But it definitely shouldn't be that every time zone is presented with equal value. There's, I don't even know, like a couple hundred time zones. I grew up in Canada. Newfoundland has its own time zone, which is offset by half an hour. The population of Newfoundland is about 500,000 people. Not that many people go to visit Newfoundland, maybe 1 million people in all of history. So like 1.5 million out of 8 billion people. And there's Newfoundland, like the same with China time, which is like 25% of the world's population. And anyway, and that was a little bit longer than I intended to go on this example, but it is, it's crazy because no one's going to switch to Gmail or to G Suite, Google Calendar from Outlook, Exchange, because the time zone picker is good. So maybe in some sense, it doesn't matter. But at the same time, there's a real value in delighting customers, and there's an emotional connection that they form or don't form. And in some cases, that can be really positive, like they would recommend it. And when they switch companies or decide to start their own company, they're going to choose to use this product or advocate for it because of that emotional connection. And vice versa, they'll also be like, I hate this thing. It drives me bananas. I really think we should stop using it or, advocate for the alternative. And I think people just don't appreciate or come back to those things often enough. And then there's this category of like really essential parts of the app. Again, like account creation, sign up, forgot password, things like that, that for most organizations very infrequently get a lot of love and iteration and improvement, despite the fact that the quality bar has gone up across the board and continually goes up.
Let's go down that rabbit hole a little bit more around delight and craft. Slack was famous for being one of the early, let's say, consumerized B2B SaaS products. Slack leaned into delight and experience and craft and a great experience. And you, just as a product leader, I'd say are known as very taste forward, very craft oriented leader, which is pretty rare. And I think continues to be rare. So there's a few things I want to talk about here. One is taste. I heard at a talk you gave a talk on taste, and you have a really unique perspective on just what taste is, what product taste looks like. Can you share that?
There is a lot of, going back to the utility curves again, people who are obsessed with this one little thing and keep on adding more and more detail improvements beyond the point where it makes much of a difference. But I guess a couple things about taste. So one is, can you learn to develop it? I think so, because the word literally comes from experiencing food and putting stuff in your mouth. And can people become better chefs with training? Yes, absolutely. Undoubtedly, some people have a natural advantage or born with this ability to make discernments that are difficult for other people to make and stuff like that. But you can definitely practice and you can definitely get better. The second thing I'd say is you can create a real advantage for yourself, for your product, for your company by leaning into it, because most people don't have good taste and don't invest. And so you're probably familiar with again, Jeff Bezos' line, "Your margin is my opportunity." And pretty obvious what he meant by that. I would tell this story at Slack over and over again, and actually made it part of the new hire welcome. So I'm in Vancouver at our Vancouver office, and I'm going for a walk with Brandon Velostek, who's our at the time creative director for product development. I think that was his title. And we're in the Yaletown neighborhood in Vancouver, so there's really narrow sidewalks, because it used to be a warehouse district, and now it's fancy restaurants and nail salons and boutiques and stuff. And as it does in Vancouver, it starts to rain. We don't have umbrellas. We're walking back to the office, and most people have umbrellas, and we're kind of on these narrow sidewalks with people coming towards us with umbrellas. And we noticed how few people would move their umbrella out of the way. And of course, the other person, their umbrella, the pokey bits are exactly at eye level for people walking towards them. And we would get forced off the sidewalk, or having to duck down or whatever. It became a game. We were guessing, is this person going to tilt their umbrella out of the way so we can pass or not? And something like 1/3 of the people would do it. And we had this conversation about it where it's okay, I can think of 3 reasons why people wouldn't do it. One is they have very few avenues in their life to exercise power, and this is one of them. And they're just want to get out there and dominate people and cause suffering. So you shouldn't ascribe to malice that which can be ascribed to ignorance. So that's probably, that probably is the explanation for a tiny percentage of people. But the other 2 explanations aren't that great either. One is that they see it's happening. They see they're pushing other people off the sidewalk or poking them in the eye or whatever. And they're just fuck, that's too bad. I wish there was something I could do about that, but I can't think of anything. And the last reason is they just don't notice at all. They're just oblivious to their impact on other people, and they're so in their head. And I can't really think of any other explanations for it besides that. And so we would say at Slack, tilting your umbrella is our opportunity. That's not a great rephrase of your margin is my opportunity, but your failure to really be considerate and exercise this courtesy and really be empathic about other people's experience is an advantage that you can create, a critical advantage. And I think that there's many reasons why Slack was successful at the moment it was successful. And I think we had a bunch of really wonderful tailwinds and all of that stuff. But it wouldn't have grown the way it did without those little conveniences, which caused people to form an emotional connection, because a lot of our growth came from, startup A uses Slack, and then someone leaves startup A for startup B, and startup B doesn't use Slack yet, and they would be like, "Oh my God, you guys, we really this is so good. We got to try it." And the spread was driven by that cross pollination and people really genuinely advocating for it.
That is an amazing metaphor. I love that one moment became like a value of product craftsmanship at Slack.
And so tilt your umbrella was a very common saying, and on company swag and stuff like that.
Is there an example? I imagine there are many, but from the time of building Slack, especially in the early days, where you chose to go big on craftsmanship and experience and delight versus speed, where you thought, looking back, that was a really great idea and it worked really core to success?
Here's a bunch of little examples. So someone else came up with this idea, and I'm trying to remember who it was. But let's see, maybe Andrea Torres, maybe Ben Brown, something like that, who was like, hey, why do we ask people for email address and password if their ownership of the email address was the thing that allowed them to create the account in the first place? Why don't we just ask them for their email address and then send them a link? And so when Slack's first version of the mobile app came out, we're like, typing your password on your phone, if you have any minimal threshold of password hygiene, is a terrible experience. Capital H, lowercase q, 6, curate, period. So let's just have them enter the email address. We'll send them a link. The link will automatically open the app and authenticate them. And so there's a little example.
Wow. So you guys invented the magic link experience.
Someone else invented. I want to be clear
Okay.
that I had seen that idea somewhere else, like someone else, a blog post about it or something like that. But we were the first ones, to my knowledge, that really kind of like scaled that and made it a standard. There is another one which we really puzzled about in the very early days, where people have a long history of using messaging apps, from like AOL Instant Messenger to SMS to WhatsApp, where their expectation is they get a notification for every message that's received. And in the case of Slack, that doesn't make as much sense, because you're a member of many channels and the messages may not be for you. And so that's why we have the tagging people. And, we certainly didn't invent that. That was Twitter. But what we realized was people were signing up for Slack, and it's like one engineer on this team inside of this larger organization, inside this larger company, and they would pull in the person next to them and they would say, let's try it out. And then they would send a message, and then one person would be like, I didn't get a notification. This is bullshit. So we reluctantly decided that we had to send notifications for every single message as the default for new accounts. But once you had, I don't remember what the thresholds were now, I think it's once you had received 10 messages, we would pop up this little thing that says, hey, you have our default settings for notifications. We don't want Slack to be noisy for you. Would you like to switch to our recommended settings? And then they would just click a link, and it would have what should be the default, which is you only get a notification if it's a DM or if someone tags you. But we realized it was worth that investment to get people over the hump. A much more, I'll give one more simple one and then one kind of more complex one. People would, just like I can't remember if it's called urgent or important, but the flag in Outlook that set the priority of a message for the recipients always got abused inside of every company. As soon as someone does it, like everyone's like, okay, I'm going to do that too for my message. And so all of your messages have the little flag and it becomes useless. We have @everyone, which causes a notification to be sent to every member of the channel when the message is sent, and people would start, someone would find this feature inside of an organization. They would @everyone. Everyone would get a notification. And then the next person to send a message was like, well, my thing's more important than Bob saying, I'm going to also @everyone. And it became really obnoxious and people would complain about it. But it was I guess tragedy of the commons is not quite exactly the same thing, but it was this real dynamic that happened over and over again. So we came up with what was called the shouty rooster. And internally we said, don't be a cock. But we didn't obviously say that publicly. When you @everyone, a little rooster would pop up and it would have like these sound waves coming out of its mouth and being really obnoxious and say, hey, this is going to cause a notification for 147 people in 8 different time zones. Are you sure you want to send this message with the @everyone? And of course, that worked amazingly and it dropped off. And again, it was really trying to shape people's behavior so that we wanted Slack to be very flexible, but we knew that there was ways to use it that would be annoying and difficult for everyone. And so try to shape the communication culture inside the organization to take best advantage of it.
That feature still exists. I see that Rooster all the time. Or no, I don't see it all. Well, actually, I do at Channel because I run a big Slack. I see that Rooster. That survived.
Yeah. That survived and good because
that's right.
It was a trivially easy thing to implement and made a really big difference. But it also taught people how the product worked because people probably didn't know that at Everyone or at Channel,
right?
Didn't think about the cost at least.
Genius.
Yeah. Here's one more. So we decided we were going to do not disturb as a feature. And we had this, not conundrum, but you're trying to take into account all the different uses of Slack. Because at the time we implemented this, like 2017, there was, tens of thousands of paying customers, the organizations, hundreds of them, probably millions of users, maybe hundreds of thousands of organizations. I don't remember how many. And everyone had set up stuff the way that they liked it, including things like ops alerts going into channels for on-call engineers for some of the biggest systems and apps in the world. And so we couldn't just deploy it right away. We realized that some of the decision makers, the owners of the organizations, were going to have really strong opinions about this. We also realized that some of the end users are going to have strong opinions. And we wanted to figure out a way to kind of balance the concerns and give people appropriate means of control. So we came up with this really elaborate system for the rollout, which was we told everyone, every Slack administrator that this was coming weeks before it came. And we told them that we were going to set a default for their organization, which I believe was either 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. in their local time zone or 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And I can't remember which was, but also that they could override that default. And also that the individual end users could override that system owner default. And finally, that the system owner could, if they change the default again, would override all of the end users' preferences. And then the end users could overwrite them again. And it wasn't to create this dynamic where people were at war, but so that you could change a policy and then people could still customize and stuff like that. But this was, a much longer and more convoluted process, but it allowed the millions of people who were using Slack to get the feature without creating a bunch of conflict and without people turning it off automatically. And I think critically with setting a bunch of defaults, because if we didn't set the default, most people wouldn't turn it on at all. If we didn't default you to do not disturb from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., you probably, if you're the average person, wouldn't ever do it yourself. So that's another elaborate example where I think that investment made sense because it was a critical feature for a lot of people. And if we hadn't done it that way, I think it would have caused a lot of complaints and conflict and stuff like that.
Those are amazing examples. I very much appreciate that Do Not Disturb feature when you guys launched that. I still remember that coming out. I'm sure a lot of people are very thankful for that.
Yeah.
Something else I heard that you often espouse, which is counterintuitive to a lot of people, is about friction in the product experience. That friction is actually often a good thing. It's a feature, not a bug a lot of times, if you use it well. Talk about your experience there.
Yeah, well, so yes. And there's also another issue around friction, which is it became like a mantra or just like a kind of an assumption that you should always be trying to remove friction. And in some cases, that's true. We would talk about in Slack, like it was hard to market. It was hard to explain what it was if you had never used it before. You could say a messaging app for businesses or whatever. But, like a critical disadvantage to Slack doing out-of-home advertising, putting up a billboard versus beer or cars is no one needs to be explained why they would want a car or beer. But everyone would have to be explained why they want Slack. And so the problem there is comprehension. And this will come up an enormous amount. So now imagine you want to get tickets to the Taylor Swift concert in San Francisco. And you go to the Ticketmaster website if you think about both your comprehension, it's perfect in this case, and that translates into the specificity of your intent, and the degree of your intent is also kind of maxed out. So like, I really want to get these tickets. I know exactly what they are. They're Taylor Swift tickets for this date at this venue. And so in that scenario, it doesn't really matter if Ticketmaster's website is slow. It doesn't really matter if the payments page errors out. Like, you're going to persist and get through it. So obviously they're better to reduce friction, but in some sense, there's not a huge amount of value in doing that. For most creators of products, there are a handful of cases where that really is true for you as well. And they include things like user registration, authentication, checkout flows for e-commerce. Like, I am significantly more likely to buy something if there's Apple Pay or Shop Pay or something like that. I'm significantly less likely to carry through the purchase of something if I have to manually enter all of the fields of my address one at a time rather than having one of those address pickers. It's crazy, but like, the issue is my intent isn't always 100%, right? And the specificity of my intent isn't always 100%. So if your thing is direct-to-consumer t-shirts and you acquire customers through Instagram ads, all of them know what t-shirts are. It's like, this looks like a good t-shirt to me, but I'm rarely like 100% intent. I might have like, very specific intent, but my intent's like 70%. So if the amount of friction is above that, I'm not going to do it. But now, okay, people coming to slack.com, they had some friend had mentioned Slack and kind of talked their ear off at some point months ago. And then they saw a news article, and then they saw someone's tweet, and then they saw an ad on a website they were visiting, and they finally said, okay, I'm going to go to this website. So their intent is like at the absolute minimum threshold. Like, it was before that last event happened, they were below, and now they're above, but they're just above. The specificity of their intent, like, I need to get Taylor Swift concerts for this date at this venue, is also very low, because they're like, it's a work thing. I'm not sure it's a spreadsheet or like a calendar or to look exactly what it is. So they were coming in at, 0.1% over these critical thresholds. What was the challenge? It wasn't friction, right? Because it's not like they were aiming for something and they knew what they were aiming for and they were just trying to get themselves to that point. What we had to worry about was creating comprehension, and in two senses. What is this thing? And what am I supposed to do next? And that creation of comprehension in the sense of explaining stuff, that creation of comprehension in the sense of the design of the UI, of the screen, of the page, or whatever, and the visual hierarchy and the affordances that are there, and the indication of things to interact with, and which thing should be the next thing to do, and all that stuff, that becomes really critical. And I think very, very few people recognize that. They're like, I want to get people who come to my webpage to the sign up form as quickly as possible. But if they don't know what they're signing up for, they don't know what it's going to do after, is it going to spam them? They don't know, am I going to have to pay on the next step or what? Then they're just going to back out. And this was like a lifelong battle, because the remove friction kind of orientation is so deep in people. Again, it really makes a difference in those cases where people do have an intent and they do know what they're trying to do. It is a poor approach when the challenge is really comprehension. And I think the secret is most 70%, 80% or whatever of a product design is in that comprehension step, because like people, if they do ever open the preferences tab and look at all the options, rarely have an idea. And if you can't teach them, or make it possible for them to discover what the capabilities are, then they're not going to take advantage of them and they're not going to get as much out of it. And I think that the trick is, for most of the unique parts of any application, most of like the specific things that your app, your product, your software does, are areas where the challenge is going to be comprehension instead of friction. It really could be anything. Like Shopify, the purpose of the of the service for its end users is generally going to be kind of clear. But most people, most first-time store openers don't know that they can get reports, or if they know that they can get reports, they don't know what kinds of reports. And if they know what kinds of reports they can get, they don't know how they can tweak them and how they can, what the timing should be and which things that are more important to display. And I could go on and on and on and on. And people just don't recognize that. So I want to see if this is still true. I'm just going to open my iPhone and the clock app. And they had the craziest description for alarms. It's a little bit different. But people can look at their own phone. So it says alarms, and then it says sleep and a vertical bar, wake up, and says no alarm and a button that says change. And then if you hit it, it says sleep is off. In order to automatically turn on sleep features and edit your schedule, you need to turn sleep on. So obviously, like, sleep was a good name for this thing if you already had a way of getting people to understand it. If you don't, it's like ungrammatical and incomprehensible. And why would you ever do it? And I gotta guess, it's been like this for years. 90+% and maybe like 98% of people just do what I do, which is that you just create I want the alarm on and I'm going to set the time for it. And I don't know what turning sleep on does. But it's just like the lack of comprehension prevents people from getting the value. And I'm sure that there's a bunch of value behind turning sleep on, whatever that means. And people spend a lot of time on those features, and it integrates with like biometrics in your watch, or who knows. I still don't know, because turning sleep on is like, what does that do? And what is it going to cost me? And what impact it's going to have? Those examples are just, to me, all over the place. And the reason I don't use most software where there was an actual choice point, or the reason I don't use most features where there was a choice point for me, is because I didn't understand what they were going to do, and I don't give a shit. And if there's one mantra that I would use to replace that, it's don't make me think. I don't know if you remember that book.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And honestly, it's been many more than 10 years since I read it, so I don't even remember all of the examples in the book. But as a mantra, that was like up there with utility curves, because for two reasons. One is it's just like it's expensive to make a decision. Like, you literally burn glucose. Like, there's a metabolic action. There's like ATP created in the mitochondria in your neurons, and like a bunch of stuff is happening. And people do get decision fatigue, and there is like, cognitive cost of all these things. But also there's an emotional aspect, which is if your software kind of stops me a second and asks me to make a decision and I don't really understand it, you make me feel stupid, right? I'm like, I don't understand this. Some people are maybe their orientation is, okay, that the software is stupid. But I think most people are like, oh, I'm dumb. And if you ever talk to people who aren't especially technologically savvy, like the canonical example is like people who are under 50 talking to their parents about using some piece of software and what they're supposed to do. The parents almost always feel stupid. Like, they're the ones that are wrong. And so if you're causing people to think, in the best case, it's like unnecessary use of their biological resources. And in the worst case, you've like now made them feel bad, like emotionally bad, and they're going to associate that with the product forever. And I mean, these are things that are just kind of rolling one into the other. So I'm going to keep going with one last thing, because they just kind of come together, which is, along with reduce friction, it's like reduce the number of clicks or taps it takes for someone to accomplish something, which is almost always exactly the wrong thing. Like, it's the easiest way, like, you could make any action in your app a single click or tap by just exposing every single possibility on one screen that scrolls for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of pages, right? And obviously that's terrible. So why do people think that a little bit of that is good? And, here's an example. Like, you open a menu, there's 14 things that people might want to do. Okay, level one is group them into like items and put a horizontal divider between them. So at least people can kind of chunk and see what there is. Step two is present the 2 or 3 most common things, or the 5 most common things, whatever, and then have some form of other. And you then you go to a submenu that has more items. And the decision of like how to tune that becomes incredibly important. I'm going to pick on Google again, just because it is, I feel like I'm Donald Trump here, but I'm going to interrupt myself again with a story. I'm at some conference or event, I don't remember what it was. And this is probably 8 years ago. And we're in the bar after the sessions ended of this thing. And John Collison from Stripe is there. And Sundar, CEO of Google, is there. And Patrick goes up to Sundar, and they can talk about anything, right? Like, Stripe wasn't at the behemoth it was now at that point, but it was still like a significant company, was up and humming. And what does Patrick want to talk to Sundar about? It's in the Gmail app, the dragging of people, like when you reply all to a message, you often want to change the to recipient to CC and move someone from CC to to or something like that. And just how physically, like the degree of dexterity that's required to do that inside of the Gmail app is very high. It still hasn't been fixed. But it really struck me that Patrick could have asked for anything. It could have been any topic. It could have been a partnership. It was so irritating to him that it worked like this, and couldn't quite get over it. So anyway, back to bashing on Google, who in many respects do an incredible job, and there's all kinds of amazing stuff they do and blah, blah, blah. But the Gmail actions on an individual email are broken into two very long menu items that are different. And one of them doesn't exist on either menu. There's an unlabeled icon is the only way to do it. And that's to mark something as unread once it's read. I have no idea why some of the actions are in one menu and some of the actions are in another menu. I think it's because some of them have to do with the individual email. Some of them have to do with the whole thread, but it doesn't seem very consistent. Every possible thing is listed there in one place. And so it becomes incredibly difficult to use because sometimes you have to tap in both menus, read all of the options and say, okay, that I've used the process of elimination and it's not here. So it must be there. Uber doesn't work like this anymore. But when I first brought this up to people inside of Slack, there was a moment when the Uber app, when you opened it, was just, where would you like to go? And other. And other was everything. Like change your payment method, set your location, anything you could do in Uber. And that was perfect because almost all of the time, people just wanted to choose where they wanted to go. Sometimes you wanted to change where your pickup was because you weren't there yet or whatever. And that was just like, what could be simpler than, I'm going to tell you where I want to go, or I'm going to choose something else. I really tried to push people to what is the thing that people, or what is the two things, or what is maybe three things that people could want to do here, and then put everything behind other. And then if it takes them 8 clicks or taps to do something, but every single one is trivially easy, that's great. If you reduce that to 2 clicks or taps, but every part of it is this fraught decision where I'm opening all of the menus and trying to figure out like which thing is the right thing. And like the more comparing 3 things to each other is this difficult. 4 things, it's kind of like geometrically more expensive to compare 15 different options all to the other to see if this is the one that you might want. Just becomes impossibly expensive. So to me, those are all really connected. And if people could get over the idea of reducing friction as a number one goal or reducing the number of clicks or taps to do something, and instead focus on how can I make this simple? How do I prevent people from having to think in order to use my software? How can I make this trivially easy? One last example, because this was really influential for me. So I was going back and forth in Vancouver and San Francisco at the time when we were talking about all this inside of Slack, and I was behind a teenager in line to board the plane, and it was like, we're on the jetway. It took a long time. And I was watching her use Snapchat, and it was insane. Like she was tapping at least 4 times a second, sometimes like 6 or 7 times a second. It was like dismissing stories and doing stuff, but there was a fluidity to it because everything was like a dead, like, do I want to see this again? Do I want to see the next story from this person? Do I want to switch to a different person? Do I want to, like, instead she a notification came up, she answered someone's thing, she took a selfie of herself, and everything was just like, so she was, tapping 4 times a second for 6 minutes. I mean, probably there were some breaks in there. And that was like the highest and best use of Snapchat for a 15-year-old girl in 2016 or whenever that was. And imagine if the goal was to try to make her cap less, like how much of an impediment it would have been to the experience that both her and Snapchat wanted to create.
It's so fun to listen to this, and the examples you gave it gives us a lot of insight into the way your mind works of just constantly unsatisfied with the way other products work with your product. And I think that's core. Like Patrick is a good example at Stripe. I feel like that's a recurring theme with very successful product leaders, just constantly unsatisfied and unhappy with how things work.
Yeah.
I love just even the way you summarize this, just like a really good reframing of, instead of obsessing with reducing friction and reducing steps, instead think, how do I reduce the amount of thinking the user has to do? I've never heard of it described as like you have to think about the ATP and glucose being used to actually think, and your goal is to reduce that versus let's just reduce friction, reduce clicks.
Yeah, I think in my more cynical examples, I would say to people like, stop what you're doing for a second, close your eyes, take a couple of deep breaths, and then pretend that you're an actual human being, and open their eyes again, and then look at this thing and see, can you figure out what it's supposed to do or say, or what action you're supposed to take, or what the impact will be if you take that action. There's a whole another related cycle. But before I get into it, because I know that I'm verbose, I want to wrap up your last example of people being unsatisfied. So here's the quote that I was trying to find. This is 2014. So like that was the year that Slack actually launched officially in February. And this is now like near the end of the year. I was interviewed by MIT Technology Review and asked if we were working to improve Slack. I said, oh God, yeah. I try to instill this into the rest of the team, but certainly I feel like what we have right now is just a giant piece of shit. Like it's just terrible, and we should be humiliated that we offer this to the public. Not everyone finds that motivational though. So I came into the office the next day, and people had printed out on like 40 pieces of 8.5 by 11 paper that quote, and pasted it up on the wall. But to me, that was like, you should be embarrassed by it. Like it should be a perpetual desire to improve. You should never be like, oh, this is great. I mean, you could be proud of individual pieces of work, but in the aggregate, if you can't see almost limitless opportunities to improve, then you shouldn't be designing the product, or you shouldn't be in charge of the company, or you shouldn't, almost nothing, again, you could reduce it down to a tiny feature, is anywhere close to perfect. And if A, that's acknowledged freely inside the organization, and B, people think about like continually improving as the goal. And that could be like Six Sigma, Toyota, Kaizen, like that kind of side of thing. Or it could be that story that, I can't remember his name right now, the guy who started Bridgewater tells about Michael Jordan. Yeah, Ray Dalio in his book talks about Michael Jordan learning to ski. Every time he messed up, he wanted the ski instructor to tell him exactly what he was doing wrong. Because to him, every one of those was like a gem that he could collect, and he could, actually become a good skier. And what he wanted to do was become a good skier. That requires a lot of trust inside the organization. But if you can get to the point where like, hey, we are trying to find improvements, we're trying to be critical because we're trying to make this as great as it can possibly be. Not always, not with every person, but most of the time with most people, you can get them to the point where that like really direct criticism is actually motivational. It is like, people are grateful to have like the feedback, whether that's coming from their peers inside the company or from end users of the product, because you realize, oh yeah, that is bad and we should fix it.
This episode is brought to you by Lovable. Not only are they the fastest growing company in history, I use it regularly and I could not recommend it more highly. If you've ever had an idea for an app but didn't know where to start, Lovable is for you. Lovable lets you build working apps and websites by simply chatting with AI. Then you can customize it, add automations, and deploy it to a live domain. It's perfect for marketers spinning up tools, product managers prototyping new ideas, and founders launching their next business. Unlike no-code tools, Lovable isn't about static pages. It builds full apps with real functionality, and it's fast. What used to take weeks, months, or years, you can now do over a weekend. So if you've been sitting on an idea, now is the time to bring it to life. Get started for free at lovable.dev. That's lovable.dev. This makes me think about, let's call it a rant that you have about how it takes a lot of work to make anything work at all, that just the default state is not working. Can you just share what you share there?
Yeah. So this is a lot to do with, and maybe this is more recent, it shows up in politics a lot for me. But by the way, if anyone listening to this can help me find this tweet storm from somewhere between 2016 and 2020, I don't have a precise idea. And it was this guy's thread about how hard it was to get a stop sign set up. And I believe it was in response to someone claiming that Bitcoin is going to replace US dollars. With something about crypto. And his point was like, here's what happened when we tried to get a stop sign put up on a residential street in my neighborhood. And the literal years it took and the number of agencies that were involved, like the engineering department, traffic planners, the HOA, I don't remember all of the organizations, because if I did, then I could search better and find this again, because it was truly a masterpiece of how difficult it is to get a stop sign put up in most places. The message that I hear from most politicians, and unfortunately this works really well, is, things should be good, but they're not because someone is doing something bad, which is preventing the goodness. So billionaires are making things unaffordable, or immigrants are taking your jobs, or lazy freeloaders are sucking off the government teat and causing us all have to pay more taxes or something like that. The reality is, like, almost nothing works. It's actually another call. In this case, John has a great encapsulation of this. I'm sure you're familiar with it, like that. It ends with the world is a museum of passion projects, because for anything to get done at all requires like not just the resources and effort required to instantiate that thing in the real world, but all of the politicking and the sociology and the convincing. And there's a book called Why Nothing Works recently, which is like, it's not I'm sorry to the author if I doubt they're listening, but just it's not like an amazingly written book. I found it like a little bit repetitive, but the content was really incredible. Just explaining why it's so hard and how there's this progressive increase in the number of vetoes that are available for any kind of course of action, and how difficult it is. And this shows up in in permitting for new construction and stuff like that, but it also shows up obviously inside of organizations. And the challenge is that people, I think this is evolutionary, biological. It's hard for us to understand the world except by anthropomorphizing it. And so if it didn't rain this year, it's because a god is mad, and probably because we didn't sacrifice enough goats or something last year. It's hard for people to understand just that, wow, weather is incredibly complex and chaotic, and ecosystems and climatology, blah, blah. Same thing with the world. Like if I am struggling to pay all of my bills and be able to afford a little bit of luxury in the sense of like a vacation or a present for my kids or whatever, it's got to be somebody's fault. Like there has to be a decision that's made somewhere. And the reality is everything is so complicated. Everything is so multivariate. It's not satisfying. It's a terrible political message. It's much easier to say that there is we understand why things are bad in the way that you're concerned about. And it turns out that it's someone's decision. And because of them, it's bad. And so if we got rid of them or were able to overcome their decision, overturn it, and institute our own thing, then things would be good for you. And this really, to me, shows up inside of organizations as well. I'll pause there.
I know, kind of along those lines, you're a big believer in something called Parkinson's Law.
Yeah, so the original of that is, I think it's 1956. It's an article in The Economist by Parkinson. And the maxim is work expands to fill the time available for its completion. And the way that shows up, this is a little bit subtle. So like one of the things I found since I don't have a job is there's much less time pressure. And that maxim, like if you want something done, give it to a busy person. The inverse is also true that like, if you're not that busy, wow, basic things take a really long time. And so Parkinson actually starts off with this example of like, writing and posting a letter. And I don't remember who he used for the first example, but someone who's like, incredibly busy and has all these things they have to respond to. And then another case, like a retired woman who has all the time in the world. It takes her a long time to write the letter. It takes her a long time to put it in the envelope and then go to the post office and post it. But the real meat of it is, for me, later when he talks about the size of the organization. He uses a bunch of examples. This is, again, 1950s, so and he's British. So he's looking at the Royal Navy, and specifically he's looking at a chart that shows the relationship between the number of capital ships in the Navy, the number of sailors, and the number of administrators. And very familiar graph for people looking at like any part of government, any part, like the relationship between the number of administrators at a university and the number of students and faculty, teaching faculty, where it's like, okay, the number of ships goes like this, and the number of sailors is like right along with it, and the number of administrators goes like this. And the reason this ties into the work expands to fill the time available for its completion is people hire and they train. And here's the kind of sad truth for anyone running a company is there are exceptions. There's like certain types of engineers that are exception to this, but the overwhelming majority of people you hire want to hire more people who report to them. And it's not because they're evil, and it's not because they're stupid. In fact, they're smart, because everyone knows that the number of people who report to you correlates with like your career trajectory, the amount of money that you're paid, the amount of authority you have inside the organization, and on and on and on. So like we would hire 27-year-old product managers in Slack who immediately want to hire someone. It's like, what the hell? What would that person do? And like they articulate it this way, but essentially it's like, well, that person would do the product management, and then I would do strategy.
Classic.
It's really, I think the essential thing to understand about this is it's not because people are evil, and it's not because they're stupid. And it's, to me, very related to the everything is complex. If you, maybe this is my Butterfield's law. I haven't thought about this before, but I tweeted this a very, very long time ago. Like if you, everything is simple if you have no idea what you're talking about. So the other side of that is like, if something seems simple, probably you don't understand it. And, there's obvious exceptions to that. But for anything that involves a large organization or a lot of human beings, if the problem seems simple, you don't get it. So every budget process, no head of engineering, no head of sales, no CFO, no GC is ever going to come back and say like, oh, I actually think like next year we can just hire fewer people, or we're going to keep it flat, or we're going to like shrink through attrition because we don't need any more people to do what we're doing. Not because they're evil, not because they're stupid, but it's an almost overpowering impulse inside the organization that often leads to disastrous results. And so I'll give one example from Slack's history. And I have tried in the past to disguise this example so that no one feels bad about it, but unfortunately the specifics are so important to the example that it's not disguised. And so I'll just reiterate that the people involved aren't stupid or evil. And one example that's from the outside. So the example inside of Slack was we introduced threads, which was the ability to reply to a message inside of a channel. And let's say you, Lenny, post a message, I, Stewart, reply to it. You will automatically get a notification. And now Sarah later on replies to the same message. Both you and I, as people who have posted that thread, will receive a notification that there's been more activity, and so on. So like, every single time anyone replies to it. So when the feature first was released, or like when we did the final product review before it was released, the input box was pre-populated with at the person before you in the thread. And I I was using the feature and I would like put the insertion point there, select all, delete, and then start writing my message. And it's, even if I wanted to at someone specifically, I almost never wanted to start my sentence with at, because it just made it hard to, reference what they were saying before. So I said, get rid of this because I think most people won't use it, or if they did want to add someone, they're not going to want to do it at the beginning of the sentence. And by the way, you're teaching them to use the product wrong, because it's important that everyone understand that every previous poster in this thread will automatically receive a notification unless they've used it. So, okay, we release it, 6 months goes by, and suddenly the at thing comes back. And so I messaged someone on the team and I said, hey, there's been a regression. This is super weird. I don't know what happened, but like the at thing came back. And they said, oh no, this is on purpose. We did a bunch of research. And so I was like, what? And I went through this, and it was, if I recall correctly, it wasn't even like P95 certainty on this analysis, but it was something like, when we do this, threads are 2.17 messages long versus 2.14 messages long on average for when we don't do it. And so, first of all, why is a longer thread better? Like maybe a shorter thread is better. Like it'd be fewer messages that people have to go back and forth. Also, that's such a tiny difference. Also, again, I don't remember the actual statistical analysis, so I'm not going to claim that it was incorrect. I'm pretty sure this was outside the bounds of certainty that they could have had. But the real thing was, oh my God. So you guys put flags into the product, you A/B tested it, you did the instrumentation, you created tables in the database or whatever we're using to record all of that. You wrote queries to pull that, you created charts based on that data, you had meetings to discuss it, and just like kind of unpacking all of the things that would have had to happen for this to come back. And it's like, thousands of person hours kind of at a minimum, because any feature change at that scale of organization is involving like a dozen people, engineering, QA, analytics teams, project managers, user research, and stuff like that. The problem with that, so I think it was a bad idea, right? But the problem with that was the difference that you could possibly achieve between having this feature and not having this feature is like this much, whatever units you want. The cost of doing the analysis was this much. So it's guaranteed to be a loser. Like there's no world in which anyone could imagine putting the at previous respondent in the thread at the beginning of the message could possibly make that much of a difference to the quality of Slack and how much utility it provides for people and all of that. But that to like put the feature flags in, to ship new versions of the product, to put the instrumentation in, to have it all the API calls, to record every action that people take, to do all the analytics, to create the dashboard, to put that, paste the screenshot of that into a Google Slides presentation, to send the invitations to the meeting, to reschedule the meeting because someone couldn't make it, to have everyone sit down and look at the thing. It's like, guaranteed loser. And I know that Fareed told you to ask me about this, hyper-realistic work-like activities. And so here's my grand theory. Hyper-realistic work-like activities goes along with this other concept called known valuable work to do. And when I say known, I mean both what it is and that it's valuable. And the problem with almost every organization, at the very beginning, you have an enormous amount of work that what to do and that it's going to be valuable. So like starting a business, open a bank account, because like there's almost infinite generative value of opening a bank account. You have to do it. It's very simple to do. And so at the very beginning of any startup, they're like, okay, I'm like creating a users table and I'm like salting passwords and like you're doing all the things that are kind of absolutely necessary, and everyone knows exactly what they are. And so that's like everyone's going to work in the morning. They're like, right on. And like, I have 10 things to do, and every single one of them is like something I know how to do. And it's like definitely going to be valuable. Time goes on, and the relationship between the supply of work to do and the demand for doing work just starts to change. More and more people get hired. Every product manager wants to hire a junior product manager. Every new person, the first person you bring on the risk and compliance team is like, oh my God, there's so many risks and things we have to be compliant with. We better hire more people on my team to do more risk and compliance work, which probably, to some degree is right, but we're going to have more and more of those people and they're going to call meetings with each other. And now suddenly you have all these people with work to do and you've done all the easy, obvious stuff. And now your questions are like, God, should we do FedRAMP High and make a GovSlack version, which is going to require us to have wholly separate physical infrastructure for the hardware that runs the software, and also a whole different operations team, which has only US citizens on it? What is the possible number of dollars that we could make from doing this, and how much complexity is going to be when we want to do updates to the software, because we update two totally separate independent systems, and it just gets out of whack. And so people end up, like, if you hire 17 product marketers, you're going to have 17 product marketers worth of demand for work to do. And if you don't have sufficient supply of product marketing work to do, they're just going to do other stuff. Again, very important, not because they're stupid, not because they're evil, but because they're like, I'm a product marketer and I want to be recognized for my work. And my spouse has criticized me because they think I should have already got promoted in the last cycle and I really got to demonstrate some wins here and whatever it is. And so people are calling meetings with their colleagues to preview the deck that they're going to show in the big meeting to get feedback on whether they should improve some of the slides. And that hyper-realistic work-like activity is superficially identical to work. We are sitting in a conference room and there's something being projected up there and we're all talking about it. And that's exactly what work is. Hopefully not all of work for everyone inside of your company, but that's exactly what we do when we're working. But this is actually a fake bit of work. And it's so subtle that I'll do it. Our board members will do it. Every exec will do it. And the further you are from having all of the context and all of the information and the decision-making authority and stuff like that, the easier it is to get trapped in this stuff. And people will just perform enormous amounts of hyper-realistic work-like activities and have no idea that that's what they're doing. And the result of that, I guess, is that if you are a leader, if you're a manager, director, an executive, you're the CEO, it's on you to ensure that there is sufficient supply of known valuable work to do. And there almost always is, but it's creating the clarity around that, creating the alignment, making sure everyone understands it, that's what they're supposed to be doing, and then obviously doing it.
Amazing. I could listen to Stewart Rand's all day. Hyper-realistic work-like activities. We need to coin this.
Unfortunately, it doesn't make a good acronym. It's pretty ugly.
Okay. I'll give it a try. And just to close the loop on that, the solution is the leader recognizing this is happening and stopping it, telling people, why are we spending time on this thing that is not going to get us anywhere?
Yeah. And that, what you just said probably isn't the best way, because that sounds like you're chiding them and they're dumb, when it's actually your responsibility to make sure that there's, sufficient clarity around what the priorities are and, explicitly saying no to things up front and stuff like that, rather than merging and say hey, you guys are a bunch of idiots wasting your time on this thing that doesn't matter. Whose fault is it? It's the manager's fault. It's the VP of whatever's fault. It's the CX, whatever. Ultimately, it's the leader of the organization that has the responsibility to make sure that there is sufficient known valuable work to do. And that's actually harder than it might appear.
Okay. Before we run out of time, I want to touch on two other topics. One is, when people think of Stewart Butterfield, I think a lot of people think of, we don't sell saddles here. Your legendary Medium post that is just, I don't know, it's become a historic piece of literature in the annals of product building and in startups. I haven't heard people ask you much about this recently, so let me just ask a couple questions. One is just, what was the reason you put that out? What was the backstory on writing that memo? Why was it necessary?
Well, it really was an internal memo, and as a bit of a digression, one of the crappy things about Slack is if all your corporate communication is on email, depending on exactly how it works and what system you use, you probably walk away with an archive of everything you said at company X. If it's Slack, once you're turned off, you lose access to all that history. And so it's kind of like, oh man, if I had only exported all of my messages before I left, I would have all this stuff. But it was absolutely verbatim, I did not change a word of what I said inside the company. When I think we were still 8 people, maybe, at most 10, but I think it was 8 people.
It was before Slack launched even.
Yeah, it was before Slack launch. It was like when we were doing private beta, and the point of it was to start to instill those ideas as early as possible and really create this alignment inside of that small team so that it could persist and survive as we grew and scaled. And yeah, that was the idea.
And the gist, just for people that aren't super familiar with it, but will link to it, is just, it's not enough just to build a great product. You just as much have to put effort into communicating what this does for them, the problem this is solving for them, the outcome this is going to achieve for them. Is that a good way to think about it?
Yeah. And again, comparing it to beer or cars, beer goes back to pre-civilization. Cars were obviously invented, but so at some point you had to convince people why they would want a car instead of a horse. For your new AI-based recruiting tool or your calendar app or whatever, there's some reason why you think that people should use yours instead of the thing that they're using now, which might be like a wholesale one-for-one replacement, or more often is like a change in the way that you're working that has a bunch of other adjacencies and you want to expand into these other categories. Well, you're not just responsible for creating the product, but also to a certain degree creating the market and creating, there's this book, Positioning, which is an absolute classic. It's very short. I would recommend everyone read it, where the point of it is, from my perspective, it's almost impossible to create a net new idea in someone's head. It's much easier to take a couple of existing ideas and put them together. So it's much easier to say it's like Jaws meets Star Wars, or it's Uber for pets or something like that, than to come up with like an actual new idea. But you have to do that because if your thing is different in any significant way from the alternatives, you're not just creating the product, you're creating the market. They're really kind of one and the same.
The reason I wanted to touch on it is I think still people continue to not listen to this advice and continue to overinvest in more features, more products, things like that. Just the specific example of we don't sell saddles here, just to quickly communicate this to folks and correct me if I'm missing anything, is just instead of, hey, look at this amazing saddle we've bought, what you want to communicate is, here, go horseback riding. Look at this incredible experience you can have. And then they decide, oh shit, I need to go buy a saddle to do that.
Yeah. And 100%, that aspect of it is not original, because I think that's something that marketers have done for a long time, certainly in Marcom and advertising. Like if you want to sell Harley Davidsons, there are people who are going to geek out on the engines and stuff like that, and like the quality of the leather and stuff like that. But what you're selling is not the motorcycle. You're selling like the open road and freedom and the wind in your hair. And if you're Lululemon, you are obviously selling yoga pants, but you're also selling like health and aspiration and being the best version of yourself and, a bunch of other stuff. So selling that, oh my God, I forgot the classic version of it, like
there's the ship.
Selling this,
instead of
the screwdriver.
Yeah, the nail.
Yeah, the nail. Anyway.
Yeah, what is that one? There's the one I think about is, instead of trying to convince men to build a ship, instill a yearning for the sea.
Yes, exactly. That's something that goes back in history.
Okay, let me ask you about pivoting. You are potentially the king of pivots. You started 2 companies, both famously pivoted, both from video games, which is why I asked you about that at the beginning, into very successful companies. I imagine many people come to you for advice on pivoting. Let me just ask, when folks come to you asking, should I stick with my idea? Should I pivot? What sort of advice do you find most helps them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's partly an intuition, because like obviously the decision is about like, have you exhausted the possibilities? And in the case where we were working on Glitch, this game where we used IRC for internal communication, and we added a bunch of IRC, which became the proto Slack. And I think Slack had an enormous advantage in the fact that we were working on this for several years without actually explicitly working on it, and only doing the minimum number of features that were absolutely guaranteed to be successful, in the sense that it was so irritating that we couldn't stand it anymore, or such an obvious improvement that we couldn't help but take advantage of it. we still had like $9 million left, and everyone still liked the game, and we were all happy working on it. But I think by that point, I had exhausted every non-ridiculous long shot idea to make it commercially successful, and so decided to abandon it. But the default advice for anyone in anything is persevere. Is like kitten hanging off the branch, and the poster says "hang in there." And I think there's a idea that you just like, and then there's so many stories of like, so and so started out going door to door and was rejected by everyone, and then suddenly there was Nike or something like that. And like, just if you stick with it long enough, you'll eventually be successful. I think you have to really be coldly rational. And some of this shows up in the book, thinking about some of it's in Annie Duke's second book, the title of which I'm forgetting right now, but someone will know it.
Yeah,
and she
Thinking Bets, and then, what was the last second one? I forget.
She actually uses Glitch and Slack as an example of like a smart fold, basically. Like my expected value here has diminished to the point where this alternative looks more attractive. And the reason I say you have to be coldly rational about it is because it's fucking humiliating. I convinced so many, and you have to convince so many people to get a company off the ground. You have to go to investors, you have to go to early employees and say like, you should leave your other job and come work for this because, here's the incredible future we're imagining. You have to go to the press and you have to make all these promises, and you have users, and you've like committed things to the users, and you've convinced them to give up their time for this thing. And so I think for a lot of people, it feels better to just keep doing it until it dies of suffocation due to lack of capital or something like that, than to admit like, okay, I was wrong. This didn't work. And it's humiliating. It's painful. It's like, it's wrenching. It has a bad impact. When we shut down Glitch, there's a lot of people who loved it and would spend all of their free time and couldn't wait to get home from work to go play it more. And that was their community. And the community just like disappeared. All these people and all these identities have been created. And obviously people lost their jobs, and people who had like moved their families to a different city in order to take this job now weren't going to have a job anymore. So pivots aren't something I take lightly, and you shouldn't be, I think it's very different to be like, there's three of us and we started making this app and then we pivoted to a different app. That doesn't even really count. Like if you're 6 months into something, you're still messing around. You're trying to figure out what it is that you're building. It's not really a pivot. Obviously, in this case, it worked out great, and there's survivorship bias, and that doesn't mean that everyone should pivot all the time. But I think it is creating the distance so that you can make an intellectual, rational decision about it rather than an emotional decision is essential.
I love also your piece of advice of just exhaust. Once you've exhausted all the ideas, that's a really good time to see what else is out there.
Yeah, exhaust all the good ideas.
All the good ideas.
All the realistic, yeah.
Yeah. The point you made about just kind of persevering, I just had Melanie Perkins, CEO of Canva, on the podcast. They went through 100 investors rejected her before somebody finally decided to invest, and she just kept pushing.
Yeah, but I think that's a slightly different example, right? Because she believed in she believed in the concept of in the product and like in the vision. It was just trying to figure out the right articulation to get investors who ended up being obviously very, very happy.
Extremely happy. Oh, geez. Okay, maybe a final topic depending on how time goes. I want to talk about generosity. I talked to a bunch of people, as I said, that have worked with you, and the number one theme that came up again and again and again when I asked them about you and what has stuck most with them is just generosity. So I'm going to read a few examples that I heard from folks that are examples of your generosity over the years. So one person shared that he needed a little money before Christmas, and he said, Stewart literally walked me out of the building, went to the cash machine, handed me $500, told me to go home to my family. Other folks shared that when you talked about Glitch just recently, when you had to lay people off, that you cried real tears when you were laying people off, and then you spent an incredible amount of time helping them find new jobs and extending their severance pay and just taking it extremely, extremely seriously, much more than I think most people feel like CEOs do. Someone else shared that you paid 100% of employees' health insurance to give them just fewer things to think about. When you went public, you basically created the best possible situation for employees. No lockup, direct listing.
Mm-hmm.
Also, with the structure of the Slack deal, people said the acquisition was very employee friendly. There's also just a bunch of, that's employees. There's also just the way you thought about customers. A few examples. You gave free credits to businesses who were struggling to pay the bills during COVID. You released this fair billing, which I think was very innovative at the time, where you stopped charging people for seats they weren't using, even though they signed the deal to charge for those seats. A lot of times just you slipped release schedules because you just wanted to make features better and better for people. And I'll end with this quote. Stewart is a leader who takes the responsibility he feels for his employees personally, and to which he extends the most generous circumstances he could muster. That feels worth celebrating. So first of all, I just want to celebrate you. I think it's really rare and inspiring to meet a leader like that. Clearly, you've had a lot of impact on a lot of people. I don't know exactly the question I want to ask, but I guess is this like in what part is this intentional? Just like, this is how we win. I'm going to be very generous and help people because I know this will help long-term. How much of this is just innate? That's just the way you are as a person?
I think a lot of it is just the way I am as a person. And I had wonderful parents who raised me right. But I think there's also, there is a little bit of a lesson there. And I'm just going to assume people's familiarity with the prisoner's dilemma. The acts of generosity to me are a way of demonstrating that I am going to cooperate as we iterate in this game. And if you do that, then people will also cooperate and you both benefit. Whereas if you never really know if the other person is going to defect at the first opportunity, then your best bet is to defect. And so, there is a game theoretic aspect, usually in games that are much, much, much more complicated than the prisoner's dilemma. I think another thing, one thing I didn't touch on before, but to me was important enough that at more than one company all hands, I made everyone in the company repeat this as a chant. It was, in the long run, the measure of our success will be the amount of value that we create for customers. And I wanted to be super clear and explicit about that because it should be, if anything you're doing feels like a little bit shady, a little bit cheating, a little bit like maximizing at the wrong moment or taking advantage of a customer or anything like that, we definitely shouldn't do it. Because to me, it was just I think it's literally true, but it's also like an ethical way to run a business. And it's not just that the ethics are good. It's like there's advantages for you. Like you're able to attract a better class of employee. Like if all your employees are ethical, then it's going to be a better place for everyone to work and you're going to be happier and you're going to have fewer internal problems and all that stuff. But I think it really is true that there's no, especially in the long run, you can't destroy value for your customers and expect to be successful. You have to actually make their lives better. And you can put effort into pointing it out to them and demonstrating that you have created this value and stuff like that. But there's no substitute for actually having created it. And I think that is incredibly important. And that implies a real generosity, whether that's in negotiating terms with an enterprise deal or that's policy decisions. Sometimes, say one time that it blew up in our face was our SLA was for any downtime, you get 100 times your money back. Which was because from my perspective, it's wow. Hey, if we're down for 2 minutes, it's like pennies. It doesn't really make any difference. If we're down for 10 hours or something like that, then we have bigger problems than paying back people. Okay. Fast forward, we now have hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue and we've gone public. And shortly after we go public, we have one of the biggest outages we ever had. I don't remember how long it was, but it was many hours. But by the time we got to that scale, 100 times the money back for the third of a day that we were down was $8 million or something like that, which had to be, it didn't cost us any money because we just gave it to people in the form of credits, but it meant that a bunch of revenue that we had already anticipated for the next quarter wasn't going to show up because people's credits were going to offset what they would have otherwise paid us. And so we definitely changed the terms of service after that because being a public company is a little bit different. But, in every other respect, I think, they were all really important decisions that were helpful in us becoming successful.
Was that policy? It was automatic, like you didn't even have to claim it. It was just automatically get this credit.
And then the default is you don't have to pay if you let us know. And this was, we will automatically, like proactively, preemptively, without any input from you, apply this credit to your account and just like send you a message that it happened. And by the way, we will do it on the aggregate for downtime, even if the issue didn't affect you as a customer.
Too generous. You found the edge where you might want to be.
Yeah.
What was that mantra again that you had the company chant? I think this is a really nice way to end it.
In the long run, the measure of our success will be the amount of value we create for customers.
Incredible. I'm just trying to picture the entire team at Slack.
It was like hundreds of people. It felt very like Kim Jong-un or like Stalin or something like that.
Well, on that note, most people don't know this about you, but your actual name when you were born is not Stewart. It was Dharma.
Yeah.
And this all makes sense as you learn that.
Yeah. It's like my name is Dharma Jeremy Butterfield. So my parents named me. And when I was 12, I changed it because I just really wanted to be normal. And for some reason, I thought Stewart was a normal name. And by the way, you'll notice this now that I said it. Any character, except for Stuart Little, the mouse, anytime you see a character in a movie, a novel, TV show, whatever, there's only the loser Stewart and the asshole Stewart. It's obviously in the collective consciousness, a terrible name, and I shouldn't have chosen it, and I regret it. But by the time I realized that Dharma and Greg had already come out, it would have seemed like I was like, bandwagon jumping, and people thought it was a girl's name, even though in India, it's obviously only a boy's name. I'm going to add just one last little tidbit because I forgot about this earlier on, and I think it helps tie things together.
Let's do it.
And it's called the owner's illusion. And this is based on something I posted on Twitter. The person who came up with the name later deleted their account. And so I have no idea who it was and who to credit for this. But what I had posted was, and this is a long time ago, when restaurant websites have gotten better, and it doesn't really matter because Google Local was taking over everything. But this is like, let's say 10 years ago. There's 5 things you could possibly want when you go to a restaurant's website. And is their street address, their phone number, the menu, the hours of operation. Oh my God, I'm forgetting the 5th thing. Oh, and making a reservation, how to make a reservation. And again, this problem has to some extent taken care of itself, or at least improved. But what you would get was like this super slow loading photo, the Ken Burns effect as it got, and and then fading in, and then some music starts playing. And then if they show you the phone number, it's not clickable, and it turns out it's not even text that you can copy because it's an image. And they don't have the hours, they don't put the address or whatever. And it's just like, oh, what? For sure, whoever made this website for the restaurant owner and the restaurant owner themselves have definitely been in a position where they went to somebody else's restaurant website because they wanted to get the address or the opening hours or the phone number or whatever. So why does it end up like this? And what should we call this? And whoever replied to the tweet, she said, we should call it the owner's delusion. And I was like, oh my God, that's perfect. And I think that is incredibly powerful, and what ends up with the result, like Apple naming whatever that feature is called sleep, which is it's too hard to understand what that can possibly mean. And that's why people anticipate, despite the fact that when they get to your website for the first time, their intent is absolutely the minimum number of micro points above the threshold required for them to actually take that action. You're like, all right, welcome to my website. And there's a bunch of BS, and there's a bunch of stuff that doesn't make any sense, and the buttons are inscrutable, and it's unclear what to do next because I think that my thing is so important. And I don't recognize that you are at work and you were late this morning and you have to go to the bathroom, and you're just like a regular human being who has stuff going on, that you're concerned that your kids will fuck up and they're getting in trouble at school and stuff like that. They're not like subjects who paid money to go to your play and are sitting in the audience and waiting for the curtain to go up. They're like people who are going to bounce in a fraction of a second. And so everyone should always be conscious of the other solution.
I love that. What's the solution? Is it have other people look at it and give you feedback? Is it?
Yeah. And like recognize it. And unfortunately, it's one of those things like Murphy's Law, like even you go wrong when you, like, even when you take into account Murphy's Law.
Right.
But if you don't name it and recognize it and discuss it and like train yourself to think in that way, that, take a breath, pretend you're a regular person, and then look at this again and see if it makes sense, then
I love that.
You're screwed.
I love that you threw this in here. I have a billion other questions I'm going to ask you in part 2 when we do this someday. Stewart, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Lenny. I really enjoyed it.
Same here. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the podcast. You can find all past episodes or learn more about the show at lennyspodcast.com. See you in the next episode. Let's paint a picture of just what it was like to join Airbnb in your 50s.
I was mentoring Brian, but he was also my boss. I was 52, the average age was 26. I had to be both wise and curious and often the dumbest person in the room.
So it's great to be in founder mode. It's not as great to be working for someone in founder mode.
Brian assumed everybody else was going to work at the same pace and duration. His point of view was like, hey, we're having a meeting in the office tonight at 10 o'clock, be there.
Everyone's talking about, we got to make the product better. We got to optimize this button and improve conversion.
Isn't the product the homes and the apartments? Jobot said, no, product in the tech industry is something different. I just said, listen, let's get some older people who are hosts in here.
This whole story is a really good example of the value of having folks that are older.
When you have older brains connecting the dots, younger team members being really fast and focused, it's brilliant. And people won't notice your wrinkles as much as they'll notice your energy.
The Airbnb experience led you to starting something called the Modern Elder Academy.
So if you think about the caterpillar to butterfly journey, midlife is the chrysalis. Midlife is not crisis. I'm happier today at 64 than I was at 47 when I was going through my flatline experience.
Well, let's back up a little bit. This near-death experience. Today, my guest is Chip Connolly. Chip is one of the most extraordinary and interesting people that you'll ever meet. He was a founding member of the board of Burning Man. He was on the board of the Esalen Institute in Big Sur. At 26, he started a hotel chain called Joie de Vivre, which went on to become the second largest boutique hotel chain in the US. After selling it, Rachitsky personally recruited Chip to join Airbnb to help Brian and the company transform from a fast-growing startup to the world's most valuable hospitality brand. After leaving Airbnb, where he was known as the Modern Elder, Chip started the Modern Elder Academy, now known as MEA, the world's first midlife wisdom school, with large, sprawling, beautiful campuses in Baja and Santa Fe. He's also written 7 books, given a TED Talk, and is just a genuinely interesting and amazing human and friend. In our conversation, we explore how to be successful in tech as you age, what he's learned working with and for Rachitsky, including a lot of real talk, how to build a great culture at your company, his near-death experience and how it changed the trajectory of his life, and so much more. If you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and follow it in your favorite podcasting app or YouTube. Also, if you become an annual subscriber of my newsletter, you get a year free of a bunch of incredible products, including Replit, Lovable, Bolt, N8N, Linear, Superhuman, Descript, Whisperflow, Gamma, Perplexity, Warp, Granola, Magic Patterns, Raycast, JetPRD, Mobbin, and more. Check it out at lennysnewsletter.com and click bundle. With that, I bring you Chip Connolly. This episode is brought to you by Great Question, the all-in-one UX research platform loved by teams at Brex, Canva, Intuit, and more. One of the most common things I hear from PMs and founders that I talk to is, I know I should be speaking to customers more, but I just don't have the time or the tools. That's exactly the gap Great Question fills. Great Question makes it easy for anyone on your team, not just researchers, to recruit participants, run interviews, send surveys, test prototypes, and then share it all with powerful video clips. It's everything you need to put your customers at the center of your product decisions. With a prompt as simple as, why did users choose us over competitors? Great Question not only reveals what your customers have already shared, but it also makes it incredibly easy to ask them in the moment for fresh insights from the right segment. Picture this. Your roadmap's clear, your team's aligned, you're shipping with confidence, and you're building exactly what your customers need. Head to greatquestion.com/Lenny to get started. This episode is brought to you by Vanta. When it comes to ensuring your company has top-notch security practices, things get complicated fast. Now you can assess risk, secure the trust of your customers, and automate compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, HIPAA, and more with a single platform, Vanta. Vanta's market-leading trust management platform helps you continuously monitor compliance alongside reporting and tracking risk. Plus, you can save hours by completing security questionnaires with Vanta AI. Join thousands of global companies that use Vanta to automate evidence collection, unify risk management, and streamline security reviews. Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/Lenny. That's VANTA.com/Lenny. Chip, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the podcast.
Oh my God, Lenny, I sort of feel like I'm your father who's so proud of his son. My son has done so well, and I like to tell my friends about you.
Wow. I am honored. I'm happy that I'm making you proud, Chip. And I feel the same in reverse. We got to work together for many years at Airbnb. I got to learn a ton from you. I'm really excited that more people are going to get to learn from you from this conversation. I'm thinking that the way that we break up this conversation is kind of break it up into three parts, which are kind of the three arcs of your career. And the three parts are your early career building Joie de Vie, your time at Airbnb, where we got to work together, and then talking through what you're working on now, the Modern Elder Academy. I actually want to start with the middle chapter. I want to talk about Airbnb, where we got to work together. Let's paint a picture of just what it was like for you to join Airbnb in your 50s, surrounded by a bunch of 20-something, 30-somethings reporting to Brian Chesky, who is, I don't know, in his 30s. What was that like?
So yeah, I wasn't planning on doing this. I got a call from a woman named Natalie Tucci, who worked at Airbnb, and said, Brian Chesky and I have been talking about having you come in and give a talk. Are you open to that? And I was like, well, what is Airbnb? This was 13 years ago. This was, I think it was the end of 2012. And then Brian called me and said, listen, we really want you to come in. And so I came in and gave a talk about innovation in hospitality. And I think I didn't realize it was sort of a dress rehearsal for Brian to sort of see whether the younger crowd there, I was 52, the average age was 26, would, feel good about, an old geezer like me with a bricks and mortar boutique hotel background, talking about the industry that Airbnb was disrupting. And as it turns out, people liked me. And so Brian said, I want you to come in and work 15 hours a week as a consultant. I want you to be my in-house mentor for both me and Joe and Nate. And I said, okay, 15 hours a week is great. And then within 3 weeks, it was 15 hours a day. And Brian, and I was saying to Brian, you're actually not paying me anything. He gave me a little bit of stock that would vest in 6 months. And I said, I don't know that this deal is working for me. This is, it seems like the company needs me a little more than you said. And he said, yeah, I gotcha. I just wanted you to get in here and see what you could do. And long story short is I ended up going full-time. And it was hard at first, Lenny, because I didn't understand the tech lingo. I didn't have any background. I was 52. I'd never worked in a tech company before. I was mentoring Brian on leadership, but he was also my boss. I was the head of global hospitality and strategy. So which meant initially I was in charge of all the hosts in the world. Over time, that was that meant a lot more things too. I was involved in many parts of the business, definitely not the technical parts. But I think the hardest thing for me was just that initially when people were talking about product and JoBot said, I'm the chief product officer. And I'm like, well, isn't the product the homes and the apartments? And JoBot said, no, product in the tech industry is something different. And so I had to be both wise and curious and often the dumbest person in the room. And that was, it required me to have a certain amount of humility, as well as to be reporting to a guy 21 years younger than me, Brian.
That actually, the point you're making there about what is the product, I asked Laura Hughes, formerly Laura Modi, what to talk to you about, who we got to work together. She's the CEO of Bobby now. You worked closely with her at Airbnb, and she said this is the thing that stuck with her most about working with you is coming in and everyone's talking about, we got to make the product better. We got to optimize this button and improve conversion and product. And you're just like, what is the product? I thought the product of Airbnb was the hosts and the experiences and the trips. And I think that shows the value of someone like you coming in with different experience and also older and helping us communicate differently to hosts who also don't understand.
Well, there's an interesting thing also, Lenny, and you know this, the difference in age between our hosts and our guests was probably about 10 years, maybe. And over time, it actually got higher because we started actually reaching out more aggressively to, boomers and Gen Xers to be hosts. And so I remember at one point, and again, let's get into product talk here. I remember at one point that there was a conversation that was going on about taking Airbnb so it was mobile only. Partly because back in the day, the two sharing economy darlings were Uber and Airbnb. And of course, Uber was pretty much a mobile only app. And Airbnb started as non-mobile and then went mobile. And then it was like, oh, wouldn't it be interesting if everything was mobile? And at some point I just said, listen, let's get some older people who are hosts in here to see how well they will be versed in managing their listing purely on mobile. And so there were times where I was a voice for older users, in this case, hosts, that was helpful to, guys and women in their 20s who are the engineers and designers and product managers. And I always liked working with you. I want to just compliment Lenny for a minute.
How sweet is
that? And we did a lot, we did a lot of different things together. And what I appreciated was you had a humility to you that was different than a lot of the other product managers. There's other product managers, I'm not going to mention their names. And some of these product managers were very good. There were other product managers though, who I found it sometimes hard to work with because they expected me to know as much as they did. And I guess it would be if the opposite side of that would be an older manager expecting a younger manager to have as much emotional intelligence, because emotional intelligence on average is something we get better at as we get older. So I think the key for me to work in that environment and make it work was to not pretend to know things I didn't know. It was to have a sense of humor and humility in how I operated. And it was to show respect and hope that I got it in return. And I don't know if you felt that way, Lenny. That's the kind of environment I tried to embody there.
Absolutely. There's a couple of threads there I want to follow. One is just working for Brian. A lot of people talk about founder mode and the power of founder mode. It's so great. That's how we do.
And guess who
Exactly.
populated that recently?
Exactly.
That was Brian.
Exactly. So it's great to be in founder mode. It's not as great to be working for someone in founder mode. Often a very challenging place to be.
Yes.
You reported to Brian. Also, you were just your own boss basically your entire career. You never really had to report to someone before. Also, he was in his 30s. You're in your 50s. What was it like working for Brian? Like the more real you can be, the better. Because a lot of people always talk about here is like, I was wonderful. I learned so much. Just like, what was that experience like? What did you learn from working for someone like Brian?
Well, let's start with the fact that I would never have gone to work for Airbnb if I didn't believe in Brian. Because quite frankly, when Brian approached me and we started talking about it, I was like, I wasn't sure I liked the business model all that well as a hotelier. So I had to believe in something beyond the business model because I wasn't sure that the business model would work. Although soon after joining, I saw the numbers. I was like, wow, this is working pretty well. But I believed in Brian because the thing that Brian showed up with initially was just a curiosity and an appetite for learning. I remember back in 2011 when the big debacle happened with the apartment getting trashed by a guest. And so Brian decided he was going to go to find, George Tenet, the former head of the CIA. And so Brian would go to experts and say to the expert, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And he did that with me when it came to hospitality. So I appreciated that a guy who had a lot of hubris, and Brian definitely has a lot of hubris, could also have the humility to say, I want to learn more about this. So it's sort of a growth mindset. What was hard with Brian is, I'd say three things. Number one is Brian assumed everybody else was going to work at the same pace and duration, and he still has this issue. I mean, the beautiful thing about Brian is he's been very honest in the last couple of years on podcasts about his workaholism and about the fact that the way he lives his life is not like other people. But back when I joined, his point of view was like, hey, we're having a meeting in the office tonight at 10 o'clock, be there. It's like, really? No, I don't think so. But so I think the fact that Brian assumed everybody else was as one-dimensional in their focus as him was at times a problem, especially for a guy like me I was at a stage in my career where like I have a lot of interests. So that was one. Number two is Brian admires and admired back then Steve Jobs so much that there was a sense that as a guy who came from the product world, from the Rhode Island School of Design, he knew better than anybody else. And so there was this, one of the challenges for a CEO sometimes, and this was my experience in my 24 years of running Joie de Vivre, my boutique hotel company, is it feels good when you feel needed. And to come into a room and sort of see something and then point out the things that are wrong makes you feel good. And if you don't have emotional intelligence, that process can really piss people off or demotivate people. And in Brian's case, I didn't have to deal with that too much because he didn't understand it. When I was starting, it was really, I was in charge of the hosts around the world. And so quite frankly, the idea of what's the psychology of the host, what's a host entrepreneur like? I went on a world tour to 20 different cities and went and talked to hosts. And I think I came back from that with a little bit of credibility with Brian to say like, hey, yes, our data science team and the quality folks who are doing qualitative interviews, they're getting something out of this. But I actually went into the homes of these hosts all around the world. And I think I was lucky because Brian did less of that than he did with other people. But for the product team, my God, I mean, a product meeting with Brian would keep people up the night before, not just because they were actually working all night long to get prepared, but also they knew they would work all night long because they probably wouldn't sleep in anticipation for this. So that was another issue I'd say. It's the other thing that, and in each of these cases, I think Brian's getting better. So just like Steve Jobs got better over time when he left and then he came back, he was much better when he came back from all the people I've talked with who worked with him. I'd say the third thing for Brian was the sense that adding a zero to something in terms of expectations or thinking you're going to set a deadline that is unreasonable is necessary, because if you don't do that, there's almost an underlying message that people won't kick ass on their own. So there was a sense that Brian had that he had to maybe create ridiculous goals, because even if we hit half of that goal, it was very encouraging. What he missed in that was the fact that when you miss a goal, and when you have someone who has power over you setting the goal or encouraging a particular goal, you're setting people up for, a lot of stress. And so at the end of the day, I think Brian is a generational leader as a millennial. And I think he deserves a lot of credit. And Airbnb is as successful as it is partly because of Brian's leadership. And I would not have been there without him. Having said that, I had to hold my tongue in meetings sometimes when I saw how he was operating, because I wouldn't have done it that way. And I think over time, I hope I had a little bit of influence on him in terms of how to apply some emotional intelligence to leading people.
For people in this position, a lot of people work for founders, especially now that founder mode is a thing. Every founder is just like, I'm the founder. You got to do what I tell you. It's founder mode. This is how we win. We're in founder mode. You shared really good insight of building credibility as a really good lever to work better with someone like that. Is there anything else you just think as tactics to be effective with founders in founder mode?
So if I, knowing what I know now, I would say, Lenny, let's do a little pep talk, you and me, before the meeting. I want you to start the meeting with the following as you present and Brian's in the room. So Brian, let's talk about what we're trying to accomplish here. Let's get really clear. And you probably did this, but let's get really clear on what, what's the intention of this iteration that we're doing on the product, like what defines success, and what do I want to get accomplished in this meeting? And you start with that, because that actually helps to make sure there's alignment. And frankly, if there's not alignment, you might as well not have the meeting. Let's spend the rest of this meeting talking about alignment. That's what I would do, because that's something you can come back to over and over again during the rest of the meeting when Brian or the founder, whomever it is beating you up on something, saying like, well, let me tell you why it looks like that or why we're doing that. It goes back to that, the 3 principles or the 3 key goals we're trying to do with this product update. And try to set alignment on the front end.
That's an important tip for anyone working with anyone even. So I love just that works especially well here. And then just going back to the credibility piece, what you shared there is you went on this world tour, not something everyone can do, but just like getting really close to your customers and using that as hey, I actually know what I'm talking about. You actually should listen to me, even though you're the founder.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is, PowerPoint or whatever tool you're using. Just be careful about being overly reliant upon it. It's especially when you have a combustible founder who may take you off path such that your deck in its current order makes no sense at all. So that I always wanted to really limit the deck as much as possible, because I didn't know where the meeting was going to go. And I wanted the deck's helpful at the very start, to just sort of set principles, set goals. But yeah.
So this whole story of you joining Airbnb in your 50s is a really good example of intergenerational collaboration, something that you're big on, just the value of having folks that are older working at tech companies. Maybe just talk about that broadly, and then we segue into other elements of your career.
I wrote a book called Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder, after my Airbnb experience. And I did a lot of research. I was like, wow, so why do we have less intergenerational collaboration in the workplace, especially in Silicon Valley, than we could use? And I started interviewing people. Then I started talking to brain scientists, neuroscientists, and realized that a younger brain has fluid intelligence, tends to be fast and focused, really good at problem solving, very good at linearity in terms of looking at things. As you get older, the brain shrinks a little bit and you have crystallized intelligence. And in crystallized intelligence, what's going on is you're going from left brain to right brain more adeptly. There's a little bit less focus, a little more holistic thinking, systemic thinking, connecting the dots. So you can imagine that on a team, when you have older brains connecting the dots, thinking broadly, peripherally, younger team members being really fast and focused and being able to think linearly, how to get things done. That combination can either be successful or not. When it's successful, it's brilliant. And I think Laura Hughes Modi, who was my director of hospitality, but also we worked in so many different capacities with her in the company. I loved working with her because her brain worked different than my brain. And that's the opportunity, is when you realize that diversity on a team, whether, there's lots of kinds of diversity, but when it comes to brain diversity, not just with neurodiverse people, but age diverse people, you get a benefit, an effective benefit that is not as noticeable, quite frankly, in some other diversities. So I found that over and over was really helpful. Part of my job sometimes was to find the blind spot. Again, if you are very focused, one of the things I said to Brian early on was, I've seen the business plan now. I know the goals of how big we want to be in 3 years. This was very early in my tenure. I said, but what we really have done, everything we're trying to do is to like have no regulations and pay no occupancy tax. Now hotels pay a bed tax, occupancy tax. We're not paying it, and we're trying to do everything we can not to pay it, knowing that, so for our listeners and viewers to know this is something that a guest pays. It's not the host who pays it. The guest pays it. It's part of the bill. If you go and stay in a hotel, there's a big tax part of the bill. But it made us more affordable by not having to have our guests pay taxes. Long story short is I said to Brian, if we're as big as we're going to be 3 years from now, I promise you we're going to be regulated. I promise you we're going to be paying occupancy taxes. So let's take some proactive steps toward building a strategy for how we're going to be regulated. And that has consistently been Airbnb's biggest challenge, is regulation in municipal markets all around the world. If we'd started a little earlier, maybe in New York, it wouldn't have gotten to the point where it has been toxic in New York for the last dozen years, ever since I was there. And there's a few other markets in the world where it was like that. So I would just say, the value in having some age diversity, even when you have an older person reporting to a younger person, is it can be collaborative. There was a guy named John Q. Smith, an engineer who I think you probably remember him at Airbnb. So this is a guy who looked younger than he was. And he was a little bit nervous about telling people his age. But the thing that was great about John is over time, he was not necessarily going to be the best coder at Airbnb. There was a whole new collection of coders coming in every month, but he became a great manager. And the beautiful thing about moving from the individual contributor to the manager, the person who can actually bring out the best in a bunch of younger people who may be better technically than he or she is, but they know how to elevate talent. I call this invisible productivity. It's productivity in which you make everybody else around you better. And that's something I tried to do with my teams at Airbnb. And ultimately I had 6 different teams, 5 hospitality and 5 other teams reporting to me. And I did my best to just be the kind of person who wasn't solving all the problems, but I was trying to elevate. There's a woman named Lisa DeBost who is at Airbnb, and she one day, the HR department was reporting to me at one point, and she was running HR. And she was 25 and had no background in HR at all. And one day she came into me and she just said, "Chip, you are my confidant." And Lisa has a French accent and fluent in French, and she said confidant in just the right way. And I said, "Oh, well, thank you, Lisa." But I said to her, "You haven't given me any juicy details yet. Like a confidant, someone who has the secrets." And she said to me, "No, in my part of France, a confidant is somebody who gives you confidence." And it was like, oh, well, maybe that's what a mentor can be, is a confidant, someone who gives you confidence and helps by asking questions, helps you as the younger mentee find your roadmap to success.
So you're sharing a lot of really good examples of the value of older folks being within tech companies. So let me just ask you this. How real is ageism in tech? And ask because a lot of people that are hiring are probably thinking, no, I'm not biased. I'm going to hire the best person. If there's someone in their 50s, I'll hire them, no problem. It doesn't feel like it actually works out that way often. Just how real of a problem is this? What do you see?
Yeah, it's clearly a problem. I'd say it's maybe a little bit less of a problem than it was a dozen years ago, because I think a dozen years ago it was almost a blind spot. In Airbnb, we had a group called Wisdom at Airbnb. It was an employee resource group for people 40 and older. And so there are lots of these kinds of groups that didn't exist a dozen years ago in all kinds of tech companies, which is good because it means that there's a voice and a way to congregate with a bunch of people who are older. And ultimately, we had these senior nomads come in and be like the voice of the customer for 10 weeks at Airbnb. And it was the Wisdom at Airbnb older employee group that really actually pushed for this with Brian. But the challenge is, in a world in which the smartest new people, especially when it comes to technical skills and engineering, are coming in with a whole new, set of skills that an older person doesn't have. the older person is both expensive and maybe perceived as slow. So in the era of AI, it's a whole new ballgame. And the question I think will be, if what AI cannot do is the human wisdom piece, artificial intelligence and human wisdom might be the balance beams here. Is it possible that older managers who have a little more emotional intelligence, a little bit more pattern recognition, a little bit more wisdom, can be of value to a company? And so it's still, the jury's still out. There was a New York Times article that just came out about the question of, is AI going to wipe out older people's jobs or younger people's jobs? And I think the answer is both. But the question is, how bad is it for both of them? And I think that what I would say to an older person, and when I say older, I mean like 45 or older, if you've done well financially and you're doing okay, the question you might ask yourself is, are you open, as I ultimately was with Brian in my 4th year at Airbnb? I took a substantial pay cut. Like I think it went down to 40% or 50% time. And my stock, my options were dropped to that level. My salary was dropped to that level because I didn't want to work full time anymore. And there are a lot of people who can be valuable in a company who have some institutional wisdom, some process knowledge of how to get things done in this organization. And in tech companies, that's really important. Airbnb, one of the biggest challenges at Airbnb has always been, how do I get shit done around here? And process knowledge allows you to understand how do you deal with an org chart and get things done, partly because you understand the motivations of different groups. And that is something you build over time. So long story short is, I just think that, older people might look at their workload and say, I'm willing to take a 20% or a 40% pay cut to go to 80% or 60% time. And the company is going to get their money's worth in that.
That's a really interesting point, that if you're older and you're maybe less connected to the most cutting edge ways of building and coding, AI makes that a lot easier in many ways, where you start to just talk to it. You don't even need to understand what's happening underneath.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of listeners who are older in tech. There's a lot of listeners who are approaching midlife, let's say, worried about what happens to their career. When you look at people you've worked with and had at your academy, which we'll talk about, who continue to thrive and continue to have a really healthy career in tech, what do they do differently? What do they do? What do they have in common that other folks you think should work on and focus on?
I think this idea of being a mentor and an intern, there's just the voracious appetite for curiosity. When I talk to someone who's in midlife and wants to be in the tech world or already is, the thing I say is show up with curiosity and a passionate engagement for what you do. And people won't necessarily notice your wrinkles as much as they'll notice your energy. And energy has 2 parts to it. Energy is, they notice that you are not just sort of resting on your laurels. You have like physical, energy in how you do your job. And when people are like that, they are sort of timeless. They're age fluid, as I say. We talk about gender fluidity. Well, this could be age fluidity. They're not defined by their age. But the other part of energy that's important is being positive. That's sort of more energetic, like a little bit more California energetic. There's a sense of like when someone's got good energy, you're drawn to them. So it's about showing up with the kind of energy of someone 10 or 20 years younger than you, and then showing up with positive energy. And I think one of the things that I would say I did well at, there's lots of things I didn't do well at Airbnb, but in terms of what I did well is I was very approachable. And over the course of time, the number of mentees I had, the number of people who just wanted to have coffee with me or tea, the number of people who just said, thank you for being in that meeting, you just sort of gave it a positive feeling, was really important. And so my energy, both the positive energy part, and then also the fact that, I could work 60 and 70 hours a week, and I could travel around the world as the Secretary of State of the company, which is what Brian called me a couple times on stage. The fact that I could do that meant that no one was looking at me and saying, let's get rid of the old fogey. Well, maybe some people were, but I wasn't aware of them. So I just think show up with that passionate engagement, that curiosity, that energy, the ability to be both the learner and the teacher with respect for people that are younger than you, and you're going to probably do pretty well.
That is really great advice. Today's episode is brought to you by Coda. I personally use Coda every single day to manage my podcast and also to manage my community. It's where I put the questions that I plan to ask every guest that's coming on the podcast. It's where I put my community resources. It's how I manage my workflows. Here's how Coda can help you. Imagine starting a project at work and your vision is clear. You know exactly who's doing what and where to find the data that you need to do your part. In fact, you don't have to waste time searching for anything because everything your team needs, from project trackers and OKRs to documents and spreadsheets, lives in one tab, all in Coda. With Coda's collaborative all-in-one workspace, you get the flexibility of docs, the structure of spreadsheets, the power of applications, and the intelligence of AI, all in one easy-to-organize tab. Like I mentioned earlier, I use Coda every single day, and more than 50,000 teams trust Coda to keep them more aligned and focused. If you're a startup team looking to increase alignment and agility, Coda can help you move from planning to execution in record time. To try it for yourself, go to coda.io/Lenny today and get 6 months free of the team plan for startups. That's coda.io/Lenny to get started for free and get 6 months of the team plan. coda.io/Lenny. Interestingly, curiosity comes up a lot when I ask AI forward people what are they focusing on helping their kids learn most. Curiosity is the most common way to describe. So at every stage of life, curiosity is something to cultivate. I want to go to the flip side of companies looking to hire. Feels like there's this untapped supply of awesome people that companies with ageism in tech aren't finding and hiring. So to help hiring managers and companies take advantage of this, what's something you suggest they do? How do they shift their mindset or maybe shift the way they hire that might help them find these people?
I think we're moving into, there's a book that David Epstein wrote called Range. And the whole premise of Range is that we're moving out of the era of the specialists and into the era of the generalists. And I think AI is just accelerating this. As we are more reliant upon AI, and AI can be exceptional at technical skills and solutions really expeditiously, I think generalists, people who can think broadly, become all the more important. And I think that what I would say to someone in HR or recruiting is beyond what I already said before, is the person passionate? Are they curious? Are they a learner? Do they have good energy? But I would also say, are they a generalist when they're a problem solver? Because I actually think that's going to be an increasingly important part of how effective companies think broadly. So I think that's a key one. I think also this idea of how do you create intergenerational collaboration in the form of mutual mentorships. One of the things I loved at Airbnb, there were a few people I did this with where I had something to teach them and they had something to teach me. So good example, my iPhone. So there's 97% of the utility of my iPhone that I probably don't use and don't know how to use. This was, back in, let's say 2013, 2014. And so there were people who knew iPhone or Google Suites back then. I'd never used a Google Doc back then when I joined Airbnb. So there were people who could teach me something technical. And then they wanted to learn something from me, which would be like, how do you run a great meeting? Or how do you give a great employee review? There are a lot of managers who've never been a manager before. And so how do you disperse people like me in the organization so that there's usually not enough time for these young managers to come to some training session on how to do a good, employee review. So you sort of have to do it out there in the field. It's like apprenticeship. Back in the trades, you're an electrician apprentice, not because you're watching, some video on it. You're out there in the field doing it. And that's a huge value in a younger company when you have some older people who have not been vested with the responsibility of managing those younger people, because they may actually be reporting to someone younger than them, but they're there to actually be support. And in some ways, I think that was part of the unexpected value that I was able to offer to Airbnb and to Brian specifically, because there are a ton of people in Airbnb who were not even in my departments who would come to me and say, I'm having a problem. How do I solve this? Can we spend lunch together? And, I almost always said yes.
I think the reason people did that in many ways is you just have a very unique aura of wisdom, and it's hard to replicate that, Chip.
Yeah, I mean, yes, and it all comes back to the curiosity. If I was just the older elder dispensing wisdom, people would have gotten bored very quickly. And I think the fact, I mean, I was on the board of Burning Man. Ooh, that's cool. And so there was I show up as someone who feels younger than I am. I mean, I'm turning 65 this year. So the bottom line is, I think people lost track of my age, partly because I lost track of my age.
That's such good advice. So on the front end, to be successful as a person kind of getting older in tech is curiosity, positive energy, the way you talked about it, passionate engagement. Is that the term?
Yep.
And then on the other side is hire generalists. This actually comes up a lot in the AI conversations, just exactly as you said, the power of generalists. It reminds me, I'm going to this gym now, and the lady there is just like, I love AI so much because I'm just such a big picture person, and I'm so bad at just thinking about the details, and AI solves all that for me. It's like, here's what I want to do. I'll do this, move my house to here. And it's like, here's what you need to do. Step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
It is remarkable. I mean, since the time I've known you, how fast it has become dominant in our lives. But yeah, I think one of the last thing I'd say is, look, I'm privileged. Yeah. So for those of you who are listening or watching this, and you're saying, well, Chip, you were 52 years old and they came to you. Like, that doesn't happen to me. I'm not in that position. The thing I would say is, you're right. But I could have been plucked and brought in, and partly as Brian's boy, people would have rejected me, because if I didn't show up the right way, it wouldn't have worked well. And there are lots of people who Brian brought into the company who didn't work well. So I think the key is, how do you get the foot in the door? And at the end of the day, those second and third order of, degrees of separation, in terms of networking are still essential. But the most important thing is to be able to articulate what you have accomplished in a new way that a recruiter says, wow. And so I really tell people, I would love to see a resume. First of all, the question that I think it was someone asked it. I don't remember if it's Sheryl Sandberg or someone else asked her, who said, what's the biggest problem you're dealing with here, and how can I help you? That's a great line. Number 2 is, what I love to see is not so much what roles you've had, what bullet points do you have of the things you've learned. Give me in a paragraph a thorny problem you faced. What was the problem, and what skills you used to actually accomplish it, and what was the result of that? I would love to see a resume like that. And the older you are, the more you can actually have a resume like that. And then you can use that as the conversation piece when you're doing your interviews. So
I love that we're getting into interview advice and resume advice.
Yes.
Speaking of thorny problems, and also why Brian decided to reach out to you, I want to go back to the beginning of your career.
Yes.
So right out of business.
You're good at this, by the way. You're good at this.
I was thinking ahead. Okay, so you're in business school. You left business school. You're like, maybe I should start a hotel. Something that rarely works out. Usually probably leads to a lot of money lost and a lot of frustration, and just like, okay, what have I done with my life? Worked out for you. Ended up building the second largest boutique hotel chain in the world, the Joie de Vie, beloved. I loved every single experience I've had at Joie de Vie. When you sold it, I was like, that is so sad. Talk about just that story. Yeah. I know this could go on for hours, but what's the...
Yeah, I'll be brief.
Yeah.
26 years old, couple of years out of Stanford Business School, working for a commercial real estate developer. I was bored silly. I wanted to do something more creative. Bill Graham, famous concert promoter, said to me, because I gotten to know him, what San Francisco really needs is a rock and roll hotel. So I decided to start looking to find a broken down motel hotel that I could turn into a rock and roll hotel. And I found something in the Tenderloin, and turn it into the Phoenix, which became a famous rock and roll hotel that I have owned for 39 years now. So long story short is that was how I started Joie de Vivre in the company. And we grew to 52 hotels around California, became the second largest, as you said, in the world, in terms of the number of hotels, boutique hotels that we operated. And I loved it till I hated it. In my late 40s, I hated it. Didn't want to do it anymore. I was, the Great Recession came along and it was just kicking my ass. And I really went through a bit of what I now call a midlife chrysalis, but a midlife crisis, where I just wanted to change everything. And I got through it. I had an NDE, I had a near-death experience where I had an allergic reaction to an antibiotic and I died. And from that point forward, I realized every day is a gift and a bonus. And, I decided to sell my company at the bottom of the Great Recession. So that was really how I created this space in my life to be able to join Airbnb.
Well, let's back up a little bit. This near-death experience, share more there. What happened there?
Yeah, I was, so I write books. I've written 7 or 8 books, and I had written a book called Peak, How Great Companies Get Their Mojo from Maslow. And it was a book that Brian really liked. And part of the reason he wanted to reach out to me. I was on a book tour. I had a broken ankle. It broke my ankle at a bachelor party, playing baseball. And I ended up with a cut on my leg, and the cut on my leg had fertilizer in it and went septic. And so I was on a very strong antibiotic and I died. I went flatline from the allergic reaction to the antibiotic. And so I saw, it happened 9 times over 90 minutes. I kept dying, kept flatlining. And yeah, ended up in the hospital for 3 days. And they finally said, listen, it's an allergic reaction, we believe. They thought it was a heart attack, they thought a bunch of stuff, stroke, etc. No, it was the allergic reaction. So, but I saw birds. I mean, I saw all this beautiful stuff. We don't have time to go into it.
What?
I did. You want to hear this? Yeah, no, I saw this beautiful stuff.
Let's do it.
The best, I think there's a hotel in San Francisco called the Vitale that I built, across the street from the Ferry Building. And it's still there, but it's no longer called the Vitale. In that hotel, there were these slippers in every guest room. One slipper said slow, the other slipper said down. And so I was wearing these slippers in my flatline thing, flying in the air in a 40-foot tall living room in the Alps, surrounded by birds that were tweeting and chirping at me. And I understood bird talk. I understood exactly what they were saying. And they kept telling me, if you slow down, you will see beauty and you will see awe. And there was a bunch of other things, but let me just limit it to that and just say, and then the birds would say, it's time to go. And the birds would go out the big window, into the mountains. And I would try to follow them. And right as I would get to the window, all of a sudden I'd come back to life.
Holy shit. I love that this was there was a message inside of this experience. I don't know how many people experienced that. Clearly this led to a big life change. And it's interesting that a lot of times you need something like that. Like, you've been doing this for how many years at that point, running Joie de Vivre?
At that point, I've been running Joie de Vivre for 22 years. And
22 years. And It's interesting that you need something like that a lot of times. Otherwise, it's just momentum just keeps carrying you forward.
Yeah. Within 2 years, I'd sold it. And, I had the chance to move on.
So with building Joie de Vivre, something you've written about a number of times is just the way you built it is a really unique approach to building a business. Specifically, there's a huge focus on culture, which also came out at Airbnb. Talk about just why you see culture as such an important part of how you build a business, like tangibly, because a lot of people talk about culture, warm, fuzzy stuff, but you think about it very tangibly.
Culture is what happens around here when the boss is not around. And the more distributed a company, the more culture is important, because the boss is around in a traditional bricks and mortar workplace where everybody shows up at 8 and leaves at 6 and we all see each other. But in my company in Joie de Vivre, we had 52 hotels and 25 restaurants and 4 spas, and it was distributed. So I couldn't be in all those places all the time. And similarly with Airbnb. I mean, Airbnb had offices around the world and it was a global company. So the more distributed you are, of course, in the remote work world we live in, the more culture is important and more difficult, because when you're remote, there's these few cues you have about how we do things around here, and they're usually in a digital virtual format, which is why, it's all the more important for you to have in-person gatherings of a team more often if you are virtual. So at the end of the day, the reason the culture is important is because it actually helps guide people in terms of making decisions. But it's also a magnet for the right kind of people. So Oracle has a different, a culture than Apple, which has a different culture than Facebook. And so you can choose the place you're going to work based upon the culture. And there are people who can be very good at what they do, but if they're in the wrong culture, they're in the wrong kind of environment, and they're not willing to shift to fit that culture. And we saw it at Airbnb over and over again. In fact, Airbnb saw it, I think, with Amazon people. Apple people have resonated pretty well at Airbnb. Amazon people less so. And those are two different cultures, Amazon and Apple. And therefore, understanding a culture before you even actually take the job is one of the more important decisions you need to make. Is like, is this culture a culture that I can live with? And maybe influence. There's language about culture fit. I like to say culture add, because culture fit to me means can actually be quite negative toward somebody who is the aberration. You have to fit in. And especially if this is like a demographic thing, a person of color, a gay person, a person in a wheelchair. So you have to fit in. But a culture add suggests that actually having some diversity on the team is helpful because it actually adds to the culture. But you still have to be able to get along in that culture. So culture is an intangible. That's the problem with it, is it's hard to measure, but you see its value and you understand whether it's working based upon employee pulse reports and things like that.
You talk about having to understand a culture is such a key part of having success at a company. Do you have any advice for just how to understand the culture for someone interviewing? I don't know, you came in, you work part-time, it's easier to experience it all. Any tips there for like, okay, this is for me, this is not for me?
When you're interviewing, you're also interviewing them. When you're interviewing, it's not about you having to prove yourself. It's also for them to actually prove themselves as a company, and also try to understand if there is some alignment in the company. And so the kind of questions I would ask as someone who's being interviewed would be, what are 3 to 5 adjectives that define this culture? What's the biggest problem in this culture in terms of something that's just endemic or sort of like baked in across the organization? And is it ever going to get fixed? And how could I come in and maybe help that? Which frankly, at a very junior level, you're not going to be able to help it, except for in very minor ways. If you're a senior person, you might be able to help it. So those are the kind of questions I'd want to know. And frankly, if I'm asking that same question about what are the adjectives to multiple people, am I hearing the same thing over and over again? And if I'm not, is that because there's not alignment? Is that because different departments have different flavors? Because you can have a culture within a department that's very different than the overall corporate culture. The corporate culture certainly has an enormous oppressive influence, but you can be in a culture, a really great culture of a team or a department, in an overall company culture that's not good. In the long run, that oppressive company culture is either going to have to evolve, or your department you may lose people.
When I reflect back on on the impact you had at Airbnb, one of the funny things I think about is triangles showing up a lot on decks. And specifically rooted in Maslow's hierarchy, just like everything's this Maslow hierarchy metaphor.
True.
And this one, I don't know, specific piece of this is you have this kind of model you think about for how to help employees be successful at a company. It's kind of rooted in your peak book philosophy. Maybe just talk about that. And then if there's anything else you want to expand on with this power of thinking through the Maslow hierarchy.
So, Maslow's hierarchy, basically 5 levels. Later in life, he had a 7 and an 8 level model. But, at the base is, physical, the kind of physical water, food, air, and you move up to self-actualization at the top. So to use this model as a hierarchy of needs for employees, customers, and investors is what the peak model is about. The peak, my book. The employee model is really simple. It's money or compensation at the base, recognition in the middle, and meaning at the top. Now, there are some industries and some kinds of jobs in which money is 90% of the pyramid. So just because it's at the base doesn't mean it's not the dominant part of the pyramid. But the differentiation often is in recognition and meaning. In nonprofits, usually the money piece of it's rather thin, and the recognition's this and meaning's huge. So understanding how do you create an organization, and I gave a TED talk in 2010 about this topic as well. How do you measure the intangibles of meaning, and how do you create an environment where people feel a sense of meaning? The customer pyramid, briefly, I'll just say that one is meeting expectations is the base, meeting desires is in the middle, and then meeting unrecognized needs. And I think one of the things that we did at Airbnb about a year after I joined and when Jonathan Mildenhall was joining is we really tried to ask ourselves, are we in the home sharing business, or are we in some kind of business that is even bigger and broader than that? And ultimately, we came up with the idea that we were in the belong anywhere business. Airbnb was not in home sharing. We were in belonging anywhere. So once you have that down, that was sort of the unrecognized need at the top of the pyramid. Then that becomes an organizing principle for how do you teach your hosts to create a sense of belonging? How does our marketing and advertising play up the belonging piece, especially, and the everywhere piece, because hotels are not everywhere, but homes are. And so I would just say that, this model, the idea of hierarchies is, I think, very helpful. My book Peak has been out for 18 years, but I still am asked to give 20 or 30 speeches a year on it.
Oh man. This pyramid of comp, recognition, meaning is really interesting, especially these days, because like with all this AI researcher poaching, there's all this talk of just like, will people just go work wherever they get the most money, or is there a mission and meaning to the work they're doing that will keep them not taking $100 million offer? And seems to be happening in a lot of cases, which shows you the power of meaning.
Yeah. I mean, if you're working for a toxic company, at some point your conscience kicks in, whether it's toxic in terms of the purpose of the company, toxic in terms of the leadership or the culture. Life is too short.
Okay, so you've had 2 major shifts in your career. You started the hotel chain, then you went to Airbnb. Most recently, the Airbnb experience, I imagine, led you to starting something called the Modern Elder Academy. Talk about what is the Modern Elder Academy.
Yeah, what is going on with that Modern Elder Academy? The Modern Elder Academy, so there was a couple times where I was called the Modern Elder at Airbnb. And then I was told that a modern elder is someone who's as curious as they are wise. So Jonathan Mildenhall, who was the chief marketing officer at Airbnb, used to call me the Modern Elder as well. And he said, like, if you ever create a school, Modern Elder would be a good name. And so we talked about it. And next thing I knew, I was like saying, okay, this is called the Modern Elder Academy. We now call it MEA because elder is a fraught word on some level. It makes you sound elderly. But what I really wanted to create was a place where people could come and do a workshop. They're 5-day workshops in Baja on the beach, or in Santa Fe on a big 4 square mile horse ranch, and reimagine and repurpose yourself. and navigate transitions. We go through so many transitions in the middle of our life. Let's say I define midlife as 35 to 75, guys. So like, it's a very long life stage. So we go through a lot of transitions. We're constantly evolving our purpose. We're building our wisdom. We have knowledge management tools out there, but where are the wisdom management tools? Where are the tools that help us to get wiser over time? And then we need to reframe our relationship with getting older, because Becca Levy has shown at Yale that when you shift your mindset on aging from a negative to a positive, you get 7.5 years of additional life, which is more life than any other biohack that's being done right now. So that's what we do. And we have 7,000 grads from 60 countries and 56 regional chapters around the world. So it's a bit of a movement. And I teach. I teach some of the workshops, and we have all kinds of famous people who come and teach. And for me, creating the world's first midlife wisdom school just feels like the natural next thing for me to do. I love hospitality, so it's a very upscale kind of experience, but we have scholarships. I love retreat centers. I was on the board of the Esalen Institute in Big Sur for 10 years. I love wellness. I've owned the Kabuki Springs and Spa for 28 years, which is the largest spa in San Francisco. And I love education. And my book, Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder, gave me a curriculum in which we've expanded quite a bit with Harvard, Yale, Stanford, and UC Berkeley professors helping us create a curriculum around midlife. And so that's how MEA came about.
To your point, I think you said Jonathan has said this was the natural next step for you. I completely agree. It's like, looking back, this is the obvious thing you should be doing right now.
Yeah.
Also, I'm learning more things about you. I didn't know you were involved with the Kabuki Spa. I think Esalen I knew. Just keep getting more interesting.
Thank you.
There's a couple threads here I want to actually follow. So this point you made about shifting your mindset to aging is a positive thing helps you live longer. That's such a powerful point. Can you just speak more to that? Just what does that look like?
Yeah, there's lots of data points. I'll talk about two. One is this Becca Levy study, which has been going on for 15 to 20 years. If you sort of buy into the ageism of American society or Hallmark cards, when you get a card at age 40, 50 or beyond, there's a belief that life gets worse as you get older. And if you can survive your midlife crisis, all you have to look forward to is disease, decrepitude, and death. And the bottom line is, there's a lot of things that get better with age. I wrote a book called Learning to Love Midlife. The subtitle says it all, 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age. And what I really wanted to do with that book, which is really, it summarizes the MEA curriculum. I wanted to write a book that sort of helped people to see the upside of aging, the unexpected pleasures of aging. So they had a pro-aging, not just an anti-aging point of view. Because when you actually have a pro-aging point of view and you see the upside of aging, you take better care of yourself, both your mind and your body. You actually are willing to learn and try new things. One of my favorite MEA questions is, 10 years from now, what will you regret if you don't learn it or do it now? It's a powerful question. Really important question as we get older. When you're young, you've got all of your life left ahead of you. But when I moved to Baja part-time in Mexico at age 56, I had a mindset which was, I'm too old to learn Spanish. I'm too old to learn to surf. But when I said, 10 years from now, what will I regret if I don't learn it or do it now? And I said, well, 10 years from now, I might still be living in Baja. Like, I should learn Spanish. I should learn how to surf because we're right next to a surf break. And so I did. So what I believe is that anticipated regret is a form of wisdom. And it's a catalyst for taking action. So that's one data point. The other data point is something called the U-curve of happiness. And it's been around for 20 years. And it shows the following. It has changed in the last couple of years because young adults are unhappy like never before. So a 20 or a 22-year-old really unhappy, 24-year-old really unhappy. But historically, the way it was is you were happy from 18 to 23 or 24. And then around 23 or 24, you start to see a long, slow decline in life satisfaction that actually bottoms out between 45 and 50. I'm sorry to tell you that, Lenny, since you're 44, but your mileage may vary.
So you're saying I'm the least happy I'll ever be. Like, that's only upside. That's great.
Yeah. Well, here's the part that's weird is that before this research was done, and it's global research across all demographics, what they found was starting around age 50 or 52, you get happier, so that you're happier in your 50s than your 40s, 60s, 50s, 70s happier than 60s, and the women in their 80s happier than 70s. So, wow. And that's partly because we are in around 45 to 50 doing this thing called the midlife unraveling, what Brené Brown calls the midlife unraveling. You're unraveling your expectations, your what you define as success, your definition of what a beautiful body looks like, and you're liberated into freedom in your 50s and beyond. And I can say that, yeah, I'm happier today at 64 than I was at 47 when I was going through my flatline experience and not wanting to run my company anymore.
You used this term earlier, the midlife chrysalis. Was that what it was?
Or chrysalis.
Chrysalis. Yeah. What is that? Is that kind of along the same lines?
So if you think about the caterpillar to butterfly journey, midlife is the chrysalis. It's that cocoon in which all of the change is happening. At the time, when you're going through it, it's like, oh shit, my life is liquefying in front of myself. But, on the other side of it, there's a metamorphosis that happens. And so I like to use the language. And in fact, I have a podcast called The Midlife Chrysalis because I want to help, change the dialogue around midlife so that the number one word attached to midlife is not crisis. But in fact, it's maybe chrysalis, and the idea that life is meant to be transformative during that era.
That is actually very empowering. I am sort of going through that, not necessarily in this intense way yet, but that might be coming. You said there's a bunch of upsides to getting older. It might be helpful just to share a couple of those things for folks that are like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that.
Emotional intelligence grows with age. Our wisdom can grow with age, although we know 70-year-olds who are not as wise as 30-year-olds. So it's a matter of what you do with your life experience. I define wisdom as metabolized experience, mindfully shared for the common good. What else gets better with age? You learn how to edit. You have no more F's left to give, no more fucks left to give. That is absolutely true, especially for women as they age. You are more spiritually curious. The list is long. And so there are a lot of things that, actually another one that I love is you're not compartmentalized. When you're younger, you're compartmentalized. As you grow older, you are growing whole. And that means you're alchemizing curiosity and wisdom, introvert, extrovert, masculine, feminine, gravitas, depth, and levity, lightness. And the people who I really admire who are 85 years old, they're so present and they're so whole. They are just who they are.
There's a quote I found from you along these lines. The societal narrative on aging is just don't do it.
Yeah. We sort of say we don't want to age, but we do want to live. And quite frankly, aging and living are the same thing, as are aging and growing.
Coming back to MEA, just for folks that are interested, curious about this, who's this for, would you say? Who should seriously look into this program?
MEA is really, the people who tend to come to MEA are in the midst of a transition. It could be selling their company, leaving a job, getting divorced, having kids, becoming an empty nester, taking care of parents till they're passing away, having a health diagnosis that's scary. So average age is 54, and it's people of all walks of life. So it's not just the tech industry, but a lot, it's very popular in the tech industry. It's people who are looking to maybe do a reframe of their purpose, and maybe even a reinvention of their career. And so, yeah, and the two campuses are just gorgeous. It's been called the Four Seasons meets Blue Zones meets the Esalen Institute, which I like. And we have online programs too. And so you don't have to come to either of our campuses in Mexico or on the beach or in New Mexico. You can actually do it online.
Those three, yeah, that's the tagline. That's your tagline right there. Esalen meets Blue Zones meets, what was the first one?
The Four Seasons.
The Four Seasons.
Yeah.
Nailed it. Okay. I'm going to zoom out and take us to a recurring segment on this podcast. I want to see if this goes anywhere. AI Corner. And with AI Corner, ask guests just what's a way that you've found AI useful in your work or in your life? Any kind of trick you've learned, any workflow, anything you found useful?
Yeah, I have a daily blog. It's called Wisdom Well, and it's on the MEA website. And when I'm looking for inspiration, you know, AI does it for me. And ultimately, it gives me a first draft. And that's good enough for me then to say, like, okay, because there's times when I'm like missing the inspiration. I tend to write really well in the morning. If it's any other time of the day, I do not like writing creatively. So if I have a deadline for tomorrow and it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon, it's like, okay, Chat GPT, I'm on my way to you. And I tend to use Chat GPT the most because I don't know. I mean, I like Claude as well, but yeah.
Okay, awesome. I was going to ask which tool you use, and what's your workflow there? Is it you use voice mode? Do you just kind of type out, here's what I'm thinking about, write me a little draft blog post?
The good news is that at this point, it knows me well enough and my blogs, and I've actually, it knows my sort of weird sense of humor, so it's able to ape me pretty well. So I'll just say I need a 250 word post on, like today. Today's post was a post that ChatGPT helped me with it. I said, I believe that there's a reframe that needs to happen with the soul. We tend to say, like, I have a soul or I don't have a soul. But what if my soul has me? What if, in fact, my job is just to be this vehicle for my soul to go to the next lifetime? And my job is to be the steward of the soul. And I said, write me something around that. And so it was just a weird idea. And of course, not all my blog posts are so new age and like that. I write a lot on leadership. But that was one that, within, 30 seconds, I had a 250 word, blog post that I then adapted, and there you go.
Amazing. Chip, we've covered a lot of ground. We've gone through your entire life, maybe actually just the tip of the iceberg. With that, we've reached our very exciting lightning round. I've got 5 questions for you. Are you ready?
Yes, let's do it.
First question, what are 2 or 3 books that you find yourself recommending most to other people?
My favorite book of all time, Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, in a concentration camp in World War II. When someone's going through a hard time in their life, I say, read that book. You'll realize it's not so bad what you're going through.
Yeah.
But it also really speaks to this idea of despair equals suffering minus meaning. I wrote a book called Emotional Equations that was a New York Times bestseller that spoke to this idea that what if you could take all of your emotions and turn them into equations? Very engineering minded of me. So that's one. I love any book by Liz Gilbert. Sort of the opposite. So Elizabeth Gilbert wrote Eat, Pray, Love. Her book, she's on faculty at MEA. She teaches here. Big Magic is just a beautiful book about sort of like, how do you get in the flow to allow the genie to come through you? Her TED Talk in 2009 was about the fact that genius is not about being the genius yourself. It's about being the receptacle for the genie to come through you.
I want to come back to this equation you shared. I was going to get to it, but I didn't. So this is a good opportunity to. So there's a couple that are really interesting to me. You wrote about these in a book.
Yeah.
You have a bunch of these equations about living a happier life. So the one you shared is despair equals suffering minus meaning.
Yes.
And so the implication there is, if you want less despair, increase the meaning.
That's right. So suffering, the sort of Buddhist philosophy, the first noble truth of Buddhism is that suffering is ever present. And so if suffering is a constant and you have 2 variables, using some algebra, I guess, you know that if you have more meaning, you have less suffering. And so that's that one.
The other one that I love is anxiety equals uncertainty times powerlessness. Maybe talk about that one briefly.
98% of anxiety comes from 2 sources. One is what you don't know, and number 2 is what you can't control or influence, and based upon social science. And so you can create an anxiety balance sheet and create 4 columns. First column is, what is it you do know about the thing that's making you anxious? The second column is, what is it you don't know? The third column is, what is it you can control or influence? And the fourth column is, what is it you can't control or influence? And when you take free-floating anxiety and put it into an equation, it actually makes it more tangible, and you often are less anxious as a result.
Boom. Okay. So if you're feeling anxious right now, this is an exercise you can do, and you'll feel less anxious in like 5 minutes. Is what I'm hearing. Okay, excellent. Very, very good nugget of advice. Okay, let's keep going with the lightning round. Come back from our tangent. Do you have a favorite recent movie or TV show you really enjoyed?
I mean, Ted Lasso is, like a sucker for that show. You know, when it comes to movies, I'm a total movie buff. We have an annual MEA film festival at our Santa Fe campus. And I would say that the film that I'm most excited about that is coming out, that most people have never heard of, is called I'll Push You. And it's the story of two guys, one of whom is in a degenerative health condition and in a wheelchair, and his best friend pushes him the 500 miles of the Camino de Santiago. And it's the relationship they build along that way.
Amazing. Very deep cut. Do you have a favorite product that you recently discovered that you really love?
Yes, hair growing material. No, Viore shorts. I sound like Scott Galloway because he advertises this, but Viore shorts are like, I just love them. They're just breathe and they're comfortable.
I'm wearing Viore joggers right now.
Yeah.
The one downside of Viore, not to make anyone mad, is they're not like they're kind of plasticky if you look at the material. So I'm trying to I don't know.
Yeah.
But I do love, there's nothing better. That's the problem. I haven't anything else like this that is all cotton. Yeah.
Yes.
But I'm a fan. I have many Viore. I don't know if they're called joggers, just, I don't know, weekenders or something. Anyway, love you, Viore. Okay. Do you have a favorite life motto that you often come back to and find really useful in work or in life? I imagine you have many, but is there one that comes to mind?
I mean, my favorite one right now is your painful life lessons are the raw material for your future wisdom. And the premise of that is that wisdom often comes through the school of hard knocks. So when you're in the midst of a really, challenging time, you're developing your future wisdom that's going to be valuable to you.
Okay. Final question. You were on the board of Burning Man, or you still are?
It was. I helped found the board of Burning Man. Yeah.
Okay. No big deal. So I don't know if you know this. I got married at Burning Man. We had an unofficial wedding there on bicycles. So it's really meaningful to us. I've been there 4 or 5 times. What's something about Burning Man that maybe people don't know, some insight story or a really unexpected piece of the journey? I imagine there's a lot, but what comes to mind?
I would say the best, not well-known thing about Burning Man is that Burning Man owns a place called Fly Ranch. And Fly Ranch is about 10 miles from Burning Man. Now, when you go to the burn, the event in, around Labor Day, you cannot go over there. It's locked off. It's 3,400 acres. But if you look at Fly Ranch, flyranch.org, I think it might even be, or it's on the Burning Man site. Fly Ranch is like the opposite of Burning Man. Burning Man is this alkaline desert. Like there's no living life there at all. It's very masculine. Fly Ranch is like porous and like lots of like desert grasses and hot springs and hot pools and birds and wild horses. And it's one of my favorite hot springs places in the world. So just check it out. And you can go there when it's not during the event. And it's quite beautiful.
Feels like it might have inspired MEA in many ways.
It did. Yes.
Chip, 2 final questions. Where can folks find you online and how can listeners be useful to you?
So online, meawisdom.com is the website for MEA. My website's chipconley.com, CONLEY. And I'm on LinkedIn. That's really, from a social media perspective, the thing that I do the most. I actually take my daily blogs and put them on LinkedIn. So, and then what your community can do, just, come say hi. Come check me out. And if wisdom is interesting to you, and I think wisdom should be interesting to everybody here, on the MEA website, at the very bottom footer, you will see a bunch of free resources. One of them is called Why Successful Leaders Value Wisdom. It is a free resource. And there's also a free resource down there called The Anatomy of a Transition. Those 2 free resources, understanding how to build your TQ, your transitional intelligence, and understanding how to develop wisdom are to my mind, 2 of the most important modern skills that we can have.
It's funny when you say you're on LinkedIn. That doesn't resonate with me. Chip Conley on LinkedIn, just posting on LinkedIn. Something about
I don't know. Why? Because I'm a little too Burning Man?
You're just, yeah, exactly. It feels like that's not your vibe. But I love that you do it because that's where the people are.
Oh, I put wild, weird stuff up on LinkedIn, and thank God somebody's doing that.
For some reason I don't see it. I need to fix that. Chip, this was incredible. Everything I was hoping it'd be. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing
Thank you,
your wisdom.
I am so proud as I go back, like I'm your proud papa who just loves to see you in your element. And I just want to make sure everybody knows the following. Lenny was so good to work with. I really, whenever you were assigned to a project as a PM, I appreciated it because I just knew that we were going to have great conversations, and you're just an interesting dude.
Well, I appreciate that, Chip. That's going to be the beginning of this whole episode. We're just going to put that up front. Just joking. That was awesome, Chip. Really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for listening. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the podcast. You can find all past episodes or learn more about the show at lennyspodcast.com. See you in the next episode.